What's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. Is this microphone coming through loud and clear for you all? Oh geez, did you see that internet speed? Not looking good. Welcome to the live stream. We're waiting on Ted still, but it's he's just got to get set up, I think. Don't we all? Let's be honest. Yeah, we do. I went through quite the hurdle today trying to make Skype do what I wanted it to do. Couldn't get that figured out. Figured out a workaround though. And so I want to say thank you to Master Signified Bodies in the chat for helping me do my test call earlier to figure out for sure that what I needed it to do is just not going to happen. You know, you would think that... Oh no, let me put the waveform behind my camera here. You would think that they would make it so that... you'd think that they'd make it so that, like, when you do a Skype call, your video shows up side by side with the other person, just... Right? Well, that used to be the way it was. That was even the way it was when I did my interview with Chris Catrone not very long ago. Right? But now, things are different because software, sometimes they change around pretty fundamental things without any warning. And so it can be a little jarring if you depend on these forms of software. Maybe I should have just all along been relying on, you know, StreamYards or whatever. But I do like doing things myself with OBS. So we'll see if this works. Lima Charlie says Master Signified Bodies. The thumbnail is everything, says Mert Kitty. What's up, Mert Kitty? Yeah, let's look at that thumbnail. Thank you. Thank you for the thumbnail compliment. It's pretty good, huh? I love this Marx Wojak, I have to say. For anyone who's like, whoa, what? Well, in the meme world, Wojak is like a cartoon character, basically. So, it's this specific one that you see very different variations of. There's the Doomer Wojak. It's probably the most favoriteest popular one of them all. What I think I'm gonna do while we're killing time, slaying time here, is show you all a couple of awesome things. One, I just want to take a quick look over here at Instagram. Plebe memes. Oh, come on. How did I just have it? There we go. Like this. Let's go to plebe memes. I just want to show you all a couple of things that exist and are worth checking out if you're into social media at all. I cannot exactly assume an audience of philosophy people who have learned to not be reliant on digital media, or at least, you know, utilize it for educational or pseudo-educational, really entertainment type purposes. But quick PSA, you know, if you have the time and energy and attention to be focusing on just doing philosophy or theory like on your own right now, you should turn this off and be doing that. If that's rare for you and you feel that you have it right now. But if that's pretty normal and you just really want to be here for this, then that's great. The reason I say that is because, yeah, it's really awesome to have a couple people in the live stream. It really is. But everything I do is not just for the live stream audience, but these videos are meant to be standalone and used later on repeat after the fact. So I expect and I look forward to revisiting this myself because what we'll be getting into is a whole conversation about the law of accumulation and the theory of breakdown in Critique of Political Economy. This is not anything that you've ever thought about probably before, not in these terms, because insofar as you've heard theories of crisis about capitalism, they are almost always wrong, super wrong. And that's what the thumbnail is all about, actually. right? That's what the thumbnail is all about. But before we get into that stuff, and while we wait for Ted, I'm just going to go ahead and share some memes. This is a Death Drive meme from the Death Drive memes for Lacanian post-teens Facebook group. Definitely check that Facebook group out if you're on Facebook. The ones I want to show you, though, are a couple ones made by Master Signified Bodies and Dimbus McNair, and also yours truly. These are time energy memes and theory plebe memes. This is a theory plebe meme. I will assume a listening audience that does not have eyes on the screen, so I'll actually have to make this accessible for you all. It has a guy and gal cuddling on a bed. Looks kind of like a small bedroom that they are in, and they're watching TV, and over the TV is Introduction to Lacan Part 1, Imaginary, Symbolic, Real. And that was the first conversation I had on Lacan with Michael Downs. So, the moment history was made. Master Signified Body says, I love the Wojak Marx. And Mert Kitty says, meme theory plebe, lol. Yes, please explain Rage Comics to the Zoomers in the chat. Oh shit, do I know Rage Comics? You have to explain. Tell me about Rage Comics really quick. Maybe I know what you're talking about, but I probably don't. This one has the guy, the Wojak, in the corner sipping on a drink with a hat, party hat on, looking kind of has like a, you can't really tell what the mood is until you think about it, but it's a little like, like I'm over here, I know something's up, they don't know. And it's got a couple of couples dancing, and the Wojak's thinking, they don't know I've invested in time energy. And the one couple, it says, subtle art of not giving a fuck fans. And the other couple dancing says 48 laws of power simps. And so, if you've never met a 48 laws of power simp, then you just don't know. But these people read Robert Greene and think he's like, they think that he's our modern day, Socrates or Confucius, for that matter. But yeah, and then my favorite little feature here is that this was another Master Signified Bodies meme. He cut out the "Give me my time energy" graphic with the time energy symbol, and it's on the chest of the Wojak, which is just I want that shirt. I want it. This is great. We weren't going to just do a meme review, but if we're killing time, let's do a meme review. And then if it turns out that for some reason Ted Reese is not able to join us, I think what I'll probably do is I'll read you a few key quotes and talk about the law of accumulation and the theory of breakdown. I'll raise questions I have about it. I'll interview myself. That's what I'll do. So don't worry. No matter what, we're going to get into what nobody understands, including myself probably. But this one's great. This is a meme made by Salamoon da Costa, who's a regular in our chat. Actually, where is Salamoon? It's kind of weird. I figured this is a time that actually works for my European friends. So I'm going to shoot Salamoon a message actually directly right now. Yo, for once I'm actually streaming at a good time for you. So hop on stream if you're available. Normally it's like 1 a.m. when I start streaming if you're in Poland. But anyway, Salamoon made this. Lil A, it's an album art. It says parental advisory, explicit content, and it's got Slavoj Žižek with purple hair and face tattoos. It says dialectes on the forehead, Hegelboy under the right eye, and the barred subject symbol under the left eye. And it says Lil A, and then that's the artist's name, Lil A, and then the title of the album is Less Than Nothing. And it actually took me a little while. I was like, why Lil A? And then I felt real stupid because it's like one of the key concepts in Lacanian theory is the Lil A, the little object of desire, the little object cause of desire, the objet petit a. So that's you can call it the little a. It's the thing that keeps us wanting all the time. It's the insatiable void that cannot be fulfilled in the structure of our psyche, or our subjectivity, to be a little bit more French about it. This one I just made a couple days ago. It's got Eric Andre shooting Hannibal, bang, 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 and Eric Andre, it says capitalism, and Hannibal, it says time energy, and then it's zoomed in on Eric Andre's face, and he's like, what? Why is everyone so ignorant, lonely, and distracted? Mert Kitty says Rage Comics is all the old reaction memes, like the troll face and all the rest. Oh. So it's basically all of the Twitch emotes, right? Or, yeah, I think it's called emotes on Twitch. I'm thankfully a little further away from Twitch meme culture. This one is a picture of Slavoj Žižek uncharacteristically laughing, and his eyes are very bright, and it's beautiful, and it says, I would prefer time energy. And one person said, I don't know how Slavoj Žižek fits into time energy theory. And actually, even Master Signified Bodies had brought that up in my time energy lecture I did a couple days ago on this channel. Make sure to check that out if you haven't. It's like got 1,000 views already, which is pretty crazy. I don't normally get a lot of views because I'm not doing anything to try to get a lot of views, so it's kind of weird, but it's right here. It's exhaustion and time energy, and it's the most recent in my uploads. If you go to my homepage, youtube.com/c/theoryplebe, you'll find all my playlists, and I've got these Professor Plebe lectures, and it's actually the most recent installment in my Professor Plebe lectures. The other one I just did very recently was, it's called Plebe's Impassioned Lecture on Heidegger's Being and Time. And the thumbnail says, Why I Care About This Fucking Book. Well, if you want to know why I care about this fucking book, then you'll just have to check it out. But, anyway, yeah, so... But Master Signified Bodies had asked how this, time energy relates to Zizek's theory of ideology, and I don't have a straightforward answer just yet because I'm still figuring that out. I'm still trying to figure out that theory of ideology. And the fact is Lacanian psychoanalysis and existential phenomenology are different approaches to doing philosophy, as is structuralism itself, and so, like critique of political economy structuralism. And so for me, one of the tasks I have set out for myself, obviously, is to think through what it means to bring those projects together. Not easy. It's going to be a lifelong task. If you really want the real definitive book and you don't want to have to hear about me thinking about it until the real book comes out, just set yourself a reminder on your phone and come back in the year 2052, and I should have it figured out by then. This meme has a couple of hot babes at the gym. One is on a treadmill, the other is on her phone, but she's pretending to be on her phone, but she's actually looking in the same direction as the blonde who's on the treadmill. And the blonde on the treadmill is saying, what do you think he's listening to? They're both checking out this Chad who's working out. And she's like, probably death metal or hard rock. Projection on her case, because she's totally like, the goth e-girl look. And, so he's like working out with his headphones in, and then it shows you what he's listening to. It's Introduction to Lacan Part 3, Death Drive, with, on the top, we talked about Sigmund Freud, Slavoj Žižek, and Todd McGowan. That was number 3 installment in the Lacan series that I've done with Michael Downs. We've done 4 so far. We've got a few more planned, but we'll see if we ever find the time and energy to actually have that conversation. This one was probably one of the first ones Master Signified Bodies made when he first started memeing just like 2 weeks ago. And I laughed so hard when I first saw this. Average School of Life fan, and it just shows some spaz being like, ah! And then it's got average theory plebe enjoyer. And this is like the most cut Chad you'll ever see. Like his neck's probably as thick as a tree trunk, and he's just grinning. And he's got like that epic jawline. He's like, and it's true. It's actually true. Every average theory plebe enjoyer that I've met is exactly like this guy, 100%. This one's got like the doomer who's like almost dead, decrepit, you know, and it says the world is a cruel and unjust place. There is no harmony in the universe. The only constant is suffering. Oh shit. Someone said, "Did you change your mic?" Why? Is that because it's good now and it wasn't good before? Also, chat, nobody told me, but my memes were being cut off here. You couldn't even see all of what I was trying to show. So sorry about that. But how dare you all not like show me, not like call me out on it. Look at this though. So yeah, we got the doomer, decrepit doomer falling into the ground. Then it says minutes later, and we've got the regular Wojak kind of looking refreshed, rejuvenated, a little blush on the cheeks even, and it says OMG, oh my god, time energy. And it's because YouTube is recommending Introduction to Lacan Part 1. We've got this one, I love this one. I made this one. Slavoj Žižek, I would prefer not to. Deadpan face, looking straight at the camera. And this is the Drake meme format. So on the top, you've got Žižek being like deadpan, hell no. On the bottom, you've got Žižek being like like laughing and looking to the side, right? And so to the side of the I would prefer not to Slavoj, we've got a shirt, a long sleeve black shirt that in large white print says Sigma male grind set. Hustle culture shit, right? And then we've got Slavoj Žižek being like, hey, give me my time energy. And so bringing it back around to the question, how does Slavoj really tie into time energy theory? Well, beyond the fact that I am like a young Žižekian in training, thanks to these theory of ideology conversations that I've been doing with Mikey and the Žižekian interpretation of Hegel and Lacan that I've been getting into through Todd McGowan and his, virtual protege at this point, Michael Downs. Beyond the fact that I am one of the young Žižekians in a sort of sense, there is just what I like about Slavoj's Bartleby politics is the idea of libidinally disinvesting from the system and from all these scripts and frameworks and oppositions that have become so charged and that basically dupe us into playing along even when we think we're playing against it. And part of that libidinal disinvestment means cutting yourself off from getting a sick kind of enjoyment or pleasure from the thing in question. Like you might love to hate it. Well, don't love to hate it. Don't love it. Don't love to hate it. Stop it. You know, what we need is to refocus. And so saying I would prefer not to, which is the Bartleby approach, taken to its extreme, Bartleby dies or ends up in prison or whatever. Because like he just says he would prefer not to everything. But there's also what would you prefer to do? For me, the positive. All right, we back. One of the things that I like though is that even if it had you all buffering for a second, the people who will be watching this in the future, like Salamoon DaCosta, who just said I promise to rewatch and comment. I'm too busy with Marx to miss such an opportunity. They don't have to see the buffering, thankfully. But yeah, my internet just kind of cut out for a second there, but it looks like I'm back. And my internet speed is looking real good, so I don't know what happened there, you know. It do be that way when you're on an antenna. Let's see if I can refresh and get that meme back. Oh, I love this one. Oh, I love this meme so much. Wait, why is it, what happened here? I want to have this full screened. I don't want to have to... Here we go. Okay, we've got three more memes to review, and then I'll show you that Facebook group. And then if Ted still hasn't joined us, I'll just take over this on my own. All right, so this one says, stop glamorizing the hustle and start glamorizing whatever lifestyle this is. And it's got, I don't know, Anne, would you say that that's like a shrew?
Hold on, let me look.
This little cartoon character that's underneath the mushroom?
Oh, I can't hear you because you're in my ears.
Oh.
A mushroom?
This,
Animal?
what is that creature?
It's not like supposed to be a cartoon anteater, is it?
No, it's not an anteater.
I don't know.
Anteaters have long noses.
You're right.
This
I
is
said cartoon.
It's a little shrew.
I don't know.
Whatever it is. Oh, you brought me oranges.
I brought us oranges and pancakes. I hope it's okay if I eat for a minute since Ted's not here yet.
Yeah, you can eat. You can hang out.
Cool. Yeah.
You won't be able to hear, but obviously I'm
That's
not
fine.
listening to anything anyway, so
Medium review.
you can just hear the live version of whatever I'm saying on the microphone. Anne was just listening from the kitchen while making some pancakes and slicing some oranges. So to anybody who's never met Anne before,
Hi.
this is Anne.
I'm Anne.
This is my partner of the last 3.5 years, and
Yeah.
we've done stuff on this channel before. Anybody who's been around for a long time probably knows Anne. Master Signified Body says, "What up, Anne?"
What up?
Anne and I we might meet up with Master Signified Bodies. We'll see. It might be just me. We don't know.
See.
We're trying to make some plans. I might go to San Diego so I can get some good Mexican food with Andrew.
See, I know that you, Andrew, like know all the good food spots, but like I'm vegan, and so I don't want to be like, oh, we gotta find the vegan. Like I want y'all to do your thing. But who knows? I might be there, just working lives. You know.
Getting work off is gonna be the hard part. Yeah. If I did, yeah. Anyway, so that's a whole other conversation we'll have later. So anyway, so back to this meme. It's a cartoon. It looks like it's from a children's storybook,
Yes.
and it's got the cutest little shrew ever. I think it's a shrew, just
You're
sitting
probably right.
underneath a mushroom while it's raining. And the other, it looks like there's like a rat that's out in the water feeling the rain coming down, but the shrew is smiling happily, reading a book. And what I really like is that he's got a little blue coat on, and he's got his little trousers.
It's very wholesome.
Yeah, and it's as wholesome as like OG Winnie the Pooh, art, or like over the garden wall, kind of. No, actually, wait, that's not the one I meant to say. I meant to say the little Peter Rabbit cartoon from back in the day. It's kind of that kind of art, and he's got like a little thermos with his like hot beverage, ostensibly
Probably
hot,
coffee.
probably coffee, might be hot cocoa depending on your flavor.
Or tea.
And then he's got a little picnic basket, and so he did have he had something else in his hands. I think it was just like a mug, and he was just chilling. But I put the book there, and then put the little "Give Me My Time Energy" logo
On the book.
on the book. Yeah, and so
He's reading theory plea books.
he's reading a theory plea book. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. And in fact, yeah, actually, it does say "Give Me My Time Energy" there on the screen. But I'm gonna go ahead and put the version that has theory plea. This is the version that's actually on the book there. So.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, last meme, or is there two more? Life needs more philosophy, bonfires, and time energy. I think this said beer, bonfires, and less drama, which is like fair enough. But what I want is bonfires, philosophy, and time energy. So stay tuned for a conference in the next year or two when we'll all get together for bonfires and
A camping conference.
a camping conference with fireside chats. It's gonna happen, folks. Save up your money now. You all better just start saving now. And then the last one is, I had to make this meme because people keep saying time energy wrong. They keep saying it with two E's. They keep saying it where it's like time energy, like where both are uppercased and hyphenated, or like combined but not fully combined because there's still two E's. And so we've got it's the classic Batman smacking Robin across the face. Bap! By the way, I want to see the comic origin of this scene.
Yeah, what's going on?
I want to know what Robin actually did to get slapped by Batman. Did he say something totally inappropriate or do something totally fucked up, or was he just like saying something slightly stupid and Batman is being a total asshole? Like what if Robin did something actually bad, like super bad, and really needed to be smacked upside the face? Or what if Batman is just like an actual super dick? So, I mean, we all probably figure it's Batman's a super dick, but I didn't realize that his character was also like an asshole, like to Robin. Maybe I don't know the comics well enough. Don't watch the movie if you haven't read well, I don't think it's the same as manga, but you know. Master Signified Body says there are vegan options everywhere.
That's true. I am not fearful for a lack of vegan options.
Mert Kitty says, yes, vegan solidarity. All right, you vegans. All right. We'll make a separate chat for you all so you can go talk about it. How much it sucks to be... I'm just kidding. Actually, the fact is I look out for vegans.
Yes, Plebe's a very good non-vegan partner for a vegan.
I look out.
Like, first day we met, first time we were hanging out, it was like, oh, look, there's a vegan option.
Yeah, actually, I introduced Anne to Thai food, Indian food, Ethiopian food.
I never would have known.
Those are some of the best vegan foods in the world. All right, so some of the best foods in the world, I'd add that. And then if you go to facebook.com/groups, /plebe enjoyers, which is a sort of meme comes from Andrew's like first meme, actually. It should have been average plebe enjoyers is the name of the group, but we've got here. I'm gonna actually make myself smaller here. Duplicate the scene.
This is important stuff.
Yeah, I want people to be able to see this shit. So make myself smaller. Make this shit larger. Put the shit on top. I'm cussing so much. I feel like we should probably play the fuck shit stack song next. I showed that to Andrew the other day.
Oh my god.
He had never seen that before.
It's a great song.
He was like, "Where was this song when I needed it?" I was like, "What? You don't need it still?" Jay Grimes says, "Is it that the goal of communism is the reduction of working hours to zero, which is being misunderstood? An economist named Jehu says this is the solution to everything, and I'd agree." Jay Grimes, please send to theoryplebe@gmail.com some info on that, or add me at DM Saunders on Facebook, because that's just my theory Facebook at this point. Yeah. Anybody who's a fellow traveler is welcome to add me here. This is my... Actually,
kind of fucked up.
This is probably my best... Is this fucked up?
I don't know. Well, what's the context of this child looking like that?
Okay, before I explain what Anne's talking about for the people who have eyes off screen, I'll say, Jay Grimes, I want you to send me some stuff on this economist you're talking about. That is actually not what we're going to get into with Grossman. If Ted Reese ever comes. Wow, he's 37 minutes late. This is not characteristic of him. So I hope he's okay. I hope everything's fine. Hey Ted, we've been live for 37 minutes. I'm just showing everybody memes and talking about things, but if you can't join, I think what we'll end up doing is I'll read some quotes from your book and from Heinrich Grossman's book, and I'll talk about this to the best of my ability to at least whet people's appetites, and then we can always reschedule later, because I know you had some stuff in a couple of hours, and so if it's just not going to work, that's totally okay. Sent. See, I don't fuck with text, y'all. It's voice messaging only.
Yeah, voice messaging is like the way to go.
Yeah, I've gotten so many people to leave Twitter DMs and other kinds of DMs and get on the voice messaging shit with me. Anyway, so Anne was saying, what's the context? Because this looks like a child who has been
sad child.
A sad child with like
non-American child.
A sad non-American child with big bags under his eyes, and he's got a little tie on and a little suit, and he's frowning, and he's got messy ass hair. Well, don't worry, everybody. It's okay. This child was dressed up as a zombie for Halloween.
Oh.
That's what happened.
Okay.
This child dressed up as a zombie for Halloween. But the reason it was already a meme going around. The reason I wanted to use it was because we were joking in the comments about how this looks like Doomer Wojak as a child. And so I added "give me my time energy" over it. And the one I had before that is the classic "it's my money and I need it now" commercial. For anybody who doesn't know that commercial, it's people just opening their windows and yelling outside, "It's my money and I need it now." And it's
some insurance company, or what was that one for?
It was either for an insurance company or for like a same day loan, like whatever, So, yeah. Anyway, it's just some old white dude yelling, "It's my time energy and I need it now" out his window. So, anyway, why did I bring this up? Oh, because I was saying,
go to your Facebook.
Either in my DMs or through email, shoot me some info about this economist. The stuff that I'm going to get into is it's related, but it's not that. So, anyway. Also, where should I read about time energy? May I assume I begin with your book? Yeah, I think that's a wonderful place to begin, is probably with my book.
There's also, can I interject here, a YouTube video that Plebe made few years ago on Theory Plebe. That's just more of a video essay style, like that kind of consolidates time energy and what it is, that I think is really a good place to start. And then the book.
Yeah, and if you type in "time energy plebe" on YouTube, the essay Anne's talking about comes up number 2 for me. Exhaustion and Time Energy is the lecture I just did. It might be a little bit more up to date. I think you'd be better off watching both, though, of course.
Like starting with the video essay, probably.
And then
3 years ago.
And then this one called "Time Energy 2, Promises." It features Anne and Scooter.
Me.
As well as this lecture I did called "Time Energy and Organizing." Like, all of these add up. In fact, actually, somebody made a playlist. Hold on. Oh, doesn't come up.
Professor Plebe lectures.
Yeah, there's some of these in my plebe lectures, but I like how YouTube's trying to correct me and say pleb. It's so funny that I spell it with 2 E's and then people still say theory pleb. Come on, everybody. I literally put 2 E's there so that you would say plebe. People are like, "We know it's wrong. We don't want to say it wrong. You spell it wrong, so we'll say it right." No, if you're saying it right, you're saying it wrong. All right. So anyway, plebe, enjoy your memes for Time Energy, Wanter, post-teens. I say post-teens because it's big kids only. And so, and it's also...
It's big kids only.
Well, it's big kids only. And it's funny to me that this whole genre of like memes, meme groups, always say for teens. And so all of the plebe-related content's for post-teens, for the big kids. So I shared Waypoint in the chat. You can definitely find it there. That might be the notification sound of Ted. Ted, where are you? Ted. I've got too many windows open. Where is Ted?
You've heard of Where's Waldo?
No, I think I'm getting messages somewhere else. Oh, wait. Here we go. Oh! He said it's not 4 p.m. yet. He said, "I'll be there in a minute." Okay. We got the time zone difference wrong. Whoops.
Where in the world is he?
Oh, no, Ted. Okay, no. We said, he even agreed, he confirmed. I have it on my screen right now. I'm not sharing the screen, but he said it. Oh, he's coming from London.
Okay.
But he had actually confirmed my time, 3 o'clock his time, and so I think he must have forgot.
It's all good.
LOL. It's cool. So he thought it would be a 4. That's all right. All right, well, if he's going to be joining us in a minute, I'm going to stop talking about meme groups.
And I'm going to go.
Love you.
Love
See you later.
Too. I'll still be listening.
Thank you for the pancakes.
Yeah.
I hope I'll get to eat them soon.
I hope so too.
All right, folks. Let's talk about Grossman now. I'm going to read a quote while we wait for Ted. Going to read a quote while we wait for Ted. Everyone, so the question raised in the chat, I think, was a really good question about, is the argument that what everybody misses is that the goal is to like reduce working hours to 0. I like that question a lot. And I think that if there's an economist working on that, then that ties in directly with my work. I think that it's a sort of PMC dream that we could just make it so nobody has to do any real work. It's really easy for people who don't have to do essential labor to sit there and talk about, well, in the world I fight for, nobody ever has to do like hard labor. It's like, yeah, okay, sitting on your comfy ass. Okay, sure. Of course, it's really easy to say that. It's not likely that we'll ever get there with that attitude, though. It's kind of my response to the people who just say they want to abolish any form of work or whatever and automate everything. It doesn't seem that realistic. First of all, because like there would obviously have to be a transitional stage there. Second of all, because someone's still going to have to worry about overseeing the robots. And you can't just have robots looking after robots all the way down.
No.
That doesn't make any sense. That'd be very expensive. Can you imagine how many planets we'd have to mine for precious rare extraterrestrial resources just to be able to have that many robots doing that work?
Also, I would personally prefer not to have my doctors, people who are like in charge of traffic safety, teachers, counselors, cooks. I prefer those to not be robots. Thank you. It rests my case. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, no, we can fully mechanize farming. And it's like, yeah, I do agree that, that we can automate a lot of it. In fact, Ted Reese talks a lot about automation in his giant book, Socialism or Extinction. But that's, there's people who want to farm. There's people who want to be doctors. We shouldn't foreclose that possibility. The point is to replace all of these unhappy, anti-intellectual, fucking wannabe cop teachers who are really just doing that job because they need to survive and this was the only thing they could do. Replace them with, automated stuff, and then still have real teachers for those who really want it or need it, right? Like a lot of doctor stuff can be automated as well, but you're still going to want to have human heart surgeons sometimes. Okay, so how to make that world? That's the question. Jay Grimes says, I like the way Murray Bookchin talked about it as the freedom to do creative work rather than labor. The idea being that work doesn't end, but a reduction of coercive elements. Jay Grimes says, where does he talk about it? Yeah, please do share. Mert Kitty says, we can't trust the robots. Yeah, 100%. Jay Grimes says, in his defense, I will say he's a very good economist. Hey, and the fact is also, when you're dealing with things in theory, it's okay to make assumptions, like the assumption Ted Reese makes about, or actually, I don't know how much Ted is making this assumption. I know Peter Fraze in his Four Futures makes this assumption of basically complete automation. It's an okay assumption to make. Obviously, like theoretically, like you always have to make some assumptions. That's okay. But switching over now to what I was saying everybody always misses when it comes to Marx. I'm just going to actually read this quote. And I wrote, keep in mind that Marx died in 1883. All right. So this is from a section called, a section in, I believe, is this Ted Reese's book? I think so. Wait, I should know this. I lost all of my paragraph breaks when I pasted this into Google Docs, so I'm a little lost for a second here. Alright, well, here we go. Why the Marxist theory of accumulation and breakdown was misunderstood. Excerpt from The Law of Accumulation by Heinrich Grossman. Alright, so there are fundamental contributions to the critique of political economy and the extension of, or adding on to, or reinterpreting, or reconstructing the Das Kapital project. And Rosa Luxemburg wrote a really important book towards that end. So did Rupert Hilferding, arguably Lenin as well. But the Law of Accumulation by Heinrich Grossman is actually critiquing all of those people, and he's essentially challenging how the Second International and then everything that sprung from the Second International fundamentally misunderstood the theory of breakdown. So let's read this quote. There are specific reasons why the compelling logic of Marx's theory of accumulation was never followed through consistently to its proper conclusion, even by Marxists themselves. From his correspondence, it is possible to see how painful it was for Marx to find that even in party circles in Germany, there was an almost unbelievable indifference to capital. The immaturity of the German workers' movement of that time corresponds better to Lassalle's pamphlets than to the massive and brilliant structure of Marx's theory. Even the leading thinkers of the workers' movement were incapable of grasping the decisive aspects of Marx's theory. It is quite typical that W. Liebknecht in 1868 requested Engels to, quote, clarify where the real difference lies between Marx and Lassalle, end quote. So it is not difficult to understand why, as M. Beer tells us today, that, this is a long quote, joining call. Hey! Yo! Welcome! Can you hear me? Ted. Uh-oh. Let me make sure my microphone's working here. Ted, can you hear me? I cannot hear you. This is weird. Hold on. Let me send him a WhatsApp. Ted, are you able to hear me? Because I cannot hear you. Oh my God. All right, folks. I'm going to go ahead and disable my my camera here. Get it working so that he can see me. I'm going to bring him over so that you all can see him. Let me change my video. Everyone, I'm sorry, this is agonizing. Alright, you should be able to see me at least now. Yeah. This is weird. Yeah, nobody can hear Ted. Don't know why I can't hear you. Can't hear you. All right. All right. Let me figure something out here really quick. We'll figure it out. Gonna go into my sound settings and figure some shit out. It's nice and sunny where you are, Ted. All right. What about now? What about now? Are you fucking kidding me? What about now? What about now? What about now? This is terrible. Here.
A little too sunny. A little too sunny.
A little too sunny, he said. Well, if you want to talk to people while I get the sound figured out, you can go ahead and send a WhatsApp message and I'll play it next to my microphone. Oh, people. Would it be a plebe stream if we didn't have technical difficulties? Would it be, though? I think something... Okay, let me show you all what I'm seeing in my screen here. I'm seeing... It says Skype is... But I can't turn it up. And then there's another Skype that's at 100%. So to me that seems to be the problem. I just don't know how to fix it. So let's go ahead and open Task Manager. I'm going to restart Skype, Ted. Oh, I should say this to WhatsApp. I'm going to restart Skype real quick here, but you can send a voice message if you want. I'm going to drop from the call and then I'll call you back. Okay, end task. Closed out. Okay, that's good. Now, let's open Skype again. Oh! Join call. Join call. Audio and video settings. That's my video. This is my audio. Should work. Should work. Okay. Join call.
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh my god, I can hear you.
I'm like,
Oh my,
relief.
oh my god, this feels so nice. Did
I
you...
can hear an echo. Oh,
You can hear an echo?
is that of myself? Yeah.
Can you?
Is that a big deal?
Well, it's going to make it hard for you to talk if you can hear an echo, so let me try to figure that out.
Apologies to everyone for me thinking this was starting at 4. I'm really sorry.
Man.
I don't know why I had that in my head.
It's so... well, originally we were talking about 4, and then we moved it down an hour. And then for a second I thought, oh, I must have got it wrong. And then I scrolled up and saw you confirmed, and I was like, you know, so it's okay though.
I'm really sorry.
Ted, you know, we did a epic meme review, you know. We couldn't have done that if it wasn't for this, so. So are you still hearing your echo?
Yeah.
Let me try to see if I can make something different. All right, what about now?
Yeah. Sorry about all the
This is like rocket science to me. It really is.
Can you?
Huh?
Do you have videos of me?
Do I have a what?
Can you hear an echo of me?
No.
Okay, well, if I'm the only one that can hear the echo, then it's not a big deal.
Oh, it's not going to be super distracting to you?
Nah, it's alright.
Alright, well, in that...
It's gone now.
It's gone now?
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah, it's gone now.
I did nothing different. I hate it when... See, that's the worst, is when I'm trying to find the problem and then I did nothing different. That's the worst.
Yeah, see, now you don't know for next time.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. That's great. Well, this is probably the point in the stream that people will drop a link in the comments saying that the conversation begins right here. I'll mess around with making it so that we appear better for folks. I'll make it so that I'm going to do a little cropping of everything so that people can see
Okay.
on the OBS side. But did you hear any of the stream?
No, it's just the last couple of minutes.
Okay, so I was doing a little introduction of Grossman by about the time that you joined. I was reading the quote from the theory from the accumulation of the law of accumulation. I was reading the quote that goes, there are specific reasons why the compelling logic of Marx's theory of accumulation was never followed through consistently to its proper conclusion, even by Marxists themselves. From his correspondence, it is possible to see how painful it was for Marx to find that even in party circles in Germany, there was an almost unbelievable indifference to capital. The immaturity of the German workers' movement of that time corresponds better to Lassalle's pamphlets than to the massive and brilliant structure of Marx's theory. Even the leading thinkers of the workers' movement were incapable of grasping the decisive aspects of Marx's theory. It is quite typical that W. Liebknecht in 1868 requested Engels to clarify where the real difference lies between Marx and Lassalle, or however you say his name. So it is not difficult to understand why, as M. Beer tells us today, that, and then this is where you called me, so I'm going to actually finish the quote here, because my kind of audience doesn't mind a long quote, because they'll come back and re-listen until they get it, you know what I mean? But it goes... Here's M. Beer says, down to 1882 and for some years afterwards, there was practically no trace of Marxism in Germany. The writings of Lassalle, the recollections of 1848 and French literature formed the real sources from which the movement drew for its theories, ideas, and feelings. Many socialists had been trained by Rodbertus or Düring, famous from the anti-Düring that Engels later wrote. Others were, at best, acquainted with the publications of the International Working Men's Association, and still others found... Now I hear myself. Did you just do something? Oh my god.
No, I turned the light on and then off because I didn't like the effect. But...
The lights in your room might be the real cause of the echo. That's not good.
I can't hear it.
Okay, chat, can you hear it? I think chat can probably hear it too. Anyway, I'll finish out the quote. So, yeah, that it's so distracting when you hear yourself. Many socialists had been trained by Rodbertus or Düring. Others were at best acquainted with the publications of the International Working Men's Association, and still others founded their demands on appeals to morality and humanity. Kautsky was the first to get through, little by little, with his popularization of Marx's ideas, which are famously problematic in a lot of ways. And so it's like the priest of Marxism, the high priest, the biggest popularizer of Marxism is Kautsky. So there's a lot of problems there. Anyway, and so I say, so we're to take from this that Marx made little impact during his lifetime. Okay, because it said in that this M. Beer quote said down to and for some years after 1882. Well, Marx died in 1883. So during his lifetime, capital was not really received. And it doesn't help that people didn't really have access to the second or third installments, volumes. And so Grossman, writing about this here, writes the law of accumulation and the theory of breakdown And this is, he was one of the fellow travelers of the Frankfurt School, but he was also actively engaged in politics. He was a Marxist in the sense of being a supporter of the Bolshevik Revolution, and he stayed loyal to it a lot longer than a lot of people. But on the other side of the aisle, the people who are critical of the Bolshevik Revolution, like Paul Maddock actually found Grossman's work to be really important. And so whether you were for or against the Leninist experiment or articulation of Marxist theory, you've got Grossman and Maddock, two sides of the way of proceeding with Marxism critically, arguing that people have missed something totally fundamental. And I think that this would not even be something on a lot of people's radar right now if it was not for Ted Reese. Ted Reese wrote a book called Socialism or Extinction. He's written a couple of other books, and most notably and most recently, and the reason kind of that we're doing this right now, is he just wrote a little book. Is it being published with Zero Books?
Yeah, it's out on Friday.
Woo! Yeah, hold it up. It says The End of Capitalism, the Thought of Heinrich Grossman. And so Ted Reese has been making the rounds to popularize and get people excited about this book. I got a pre-copy or whatever, like I was able to read it ahead of time. So was Swole. Swole is actually in the front cover. Like if you flip it open, like one of the quotes from him saying that this is a very important work. Well, and I think it is. And so I'm really excited to bring you on so that we could talk about this. But the one thing that I was telling you yesterday, Ted, is that, I mean, my brain gets a little mushy whenever people start using these Marxist terms, even though I've been reading this stuff for a long time. And I'm just like, I know that if I'm having trouble following, then my audience is probably having a harder time following, because a lot of times people coming to this are new to theory and they are either multitasking workers with earbuds in, or they're playing video games after work, or they're driving between places or cooking or working out. But the point is like, they're not sitting there usually reading it on their own. Maybe they will in the future. And that's what people do, is when they don't have the energy, but they've got a little time, they'll, go to YouTube. And then eventually it'll put something on their radar. It'll become a burning question, and then they'll read it later. And so what I hope is that some people will read your book and that they'll buy it this week. That would be awesome. So once it's actually available, please share it in the comments below. But do you want to talk a little bit about this book and your overall work, and then we can talk about the theory of breakdown and what is it exactly that everybody's missing?
Okay, so yeah, firstly, thanks very much for inviting me on, and I'm really sorry for being late.
It's okay.
Yeah, so Grossman is important, I think, just as someone who really got to grips with the actual theory of, like, the most accurate reading of Marx after Marx and Engels. And I mean, it's funny that you used that quote a minute ago, because I used it the other day for something I'm writing about how Grossman is now becoming more relevant than ever. Like, he's been, like you say, Marx and Grossman were kind of undeservedly sort of cast aside during their lifetimes, but they're relevant again, and they're becoming increasingly relevant as capitalism ages. And you could even argue that they're becoming relevant for the first time in a sense. Obviously, they've been relevant before, and their crisis theory has always been relevant. But if there is a final breakdown of capitalism where it has a crisis that just becomes insurmountable on a capitalistic basis, that really forces through a socialist revolution, then that would be the case. So that the thing with Grossman is he puts the crisis theory and the breakdown theory back into he works back towards the essence of it, because there's all sorts of reasons that a crisis can occur, that an economic contraction can occur, but most of those would be external to the mode of production per se. where what he's talking about is there is a dual characteristic in the mode of production as it exists, as it has to exist, that actually creates the necessity for economic crisis in the way that capitalism develops. So we tend to get recessions every 10 years. And what he's saying is that these recessions will tend to get proportionately worse over time, and they must eventually sort of work towards one that has to be will at the time, and obviously you can't tell until it's over, but will have to be counted as a final crisis, because essentially as the system gets bigger, it becomes harder to reproduce and expand yet further. So he's saying that eventually there has to be an absolute limit to capital accumulation, and I think we are heading towards that at some point in this century, but I think probably a lot sooner. And yeah, that's so once I'd read Grossman and found him clarifying of Marx, I decided to start writing, and one of the reasons was to try and explain it as clearly as possible. I don't know how well I've done that, and obviously we can talk more about trying to clear some of the concepts involved up.
Yeah, so, and if I was hearing this for the first time, I think I would think, well, I've already heard that capitalism is not sustainable, that it's crisis-ridden, and that, you know, the booms and busts, the great recessions that are, you know, these are caused by capitalism, and that, you know, infinite growth on a finite planet is not possible. Right? So I think even someone who's relatively new to this stuff, who's not even, say, expressly anti-capitalist, could at least agree with all of that. So what's added to this by Grossman's approach, or his reconstruction?
So yeah, he's the first one to accurately explain the structure of capital after Marx. So there was a lot of confusion about what Marx did and what capital was doing, whether those distortions were done purposefully or what. I mean, some of it probably was that, some of it was lazy intellectualism, some was probably just subconscious denial, or whatever you want to call it. So Grossman shows that Marx demonstrated a breakdown tendency in capitalism as a mode per se. So Marx and Grossman both use schemas, sort of mathematical schemas, that isolate the main feature. They start out with an abstraction. So they isolate the main features of capitalism and develop a mathematical pattern to see if that mathematical pattern is sustainable. So what you have is constant capital, which is the value of the means of production, the value, not the amount of means of production, but the value. And you have variable capital, which is wages, but it's in the abstraction, it's also use values, i.e. commodities, so the number being produced, and it's also the population. So it's abstracted all of those things together to simplify this schema down to what you might want to call like a pure version of capitalism.
So he distills it down to a pure formula by focusing on means of production, wages, commodities, and what was the other one?
Like working population, the size of the working population.
Okay.
So you've got constant capital, which is the value of the means of production, the value of it, and then variable capital, which is the value of wages. So how much is being the outlay of wages. So, and then you have the capitalist class and the working class, you don't, the schema excludes the other classes, whether you want to call them third persons or the consuming class or whatever. It excludes those to simplify it. It excludes competition. So there's essentially a singular capitalist class, and it excludes foreign trade.
It excludes competition?
Sorry?
It excludes competition even.
Yeah, just initially.
Right, because I was going to say, I, as far as I can tell, I think that, yeah, once we get more into it, competition definitely plays a big role in the rate of the profit tending to fall, right?
Yeah, so he brings competition back in later, and he brings in all the other aspects that were initially excluded back into it, and to see what effect it has. So he starts out with the pattern is that constant capital grows by 10% every year or cycle, and variable capital grows by 5%. So what you have is
variable capital is just the value of the wages.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay.
So the reason there's the 10-to-5 ratio is because the abstraction needs to be plausible. It needs to relate to empirical evidence. You can't just come up with you can't have an oversimplified abstraction that doesn't relate to the empirical evidence, which shows that constant capital tends to grow more than variable capital. So what happens? He's going through the cycle and seeing if the amount of capital accumulating can be sustained in the long run, whilst also covering the growth of variable capital and the consumption of the capitalist class. So you have to have that in there, because that's the incentive for being a capitalist. So there's also a rate of surplus value, which is held constant at 100%. So that's constant throughout each cycle. So as constant capital grows by 10% and surplus value grows by 5%, is that constant rate of surplus value enough to cover the additional capital that you need to grow constant capital at the postulated rate of 10% and the variable capital at 5%? So a Marxist called Otto Bauer had used this same schema, and he did it, and his conclusion was there's no problem. The constant capital can keep growing at 10% and the variable at 5%, and there's no problems with accumulation. He did show that the rate of profit was tending to fall, but it wasn't a problem because there was enough additional capital, there's enough additional variable capital, and there's enough for the consumption of the capitalist class. But he only did it for 4 years or 4 cycles, which strikes me as intellectual laziness at the very least. So what Grossman does is he says, okay, let's carry this on a bit longer and see what happens. And you get to year 36 and it breaks down. There's not enough additional capital or additional variable capital to cover the rate of accumulation at the postulated rate, and there's the consumption fund for the capitalist disappears. So in this pure version of capitalism, which starts out with a kind of equilibrium that you would expect out in times where we're not suffering a crisis in terms of supply and demand between capital and labour, he shows that in this normal or pure version of capitalism, the system does break down. You essentially have a surplus of capital, which he calls an overaccumulation of capital, that can't be reinvested profitably. So it's not going. This surplus capital that arises can't breed additional profit. And alongside that, you get a surplus of labour as well that can't be re-employed. So then so now you have supply and demand out of whack, and the accumulation breaks down. That's what he's showing. The numbers in the accumulation process break down. He also calls this a valorization process. So what is the purpose of capitalism from its standpoint? It's to produce value, and this accumulation of value is also accumulation of capital. So capital is the means of production, but constant capital is the value of this means of production. So you get to the point where this accumulation of value or constant capital breaks down. So that would mean that the initial numbers that were used in terms of rate of accumulation, rate of surplus value, growth of variable capital, whatever it is, it would need to change. At that point, it needs to change to get the process going again. So it's a breakdown in valorization, a breakdown in accumulation, and an over-accumulation of capital, but it's also an underproduction of surplus value.
Okay. And so at this point, I think you've used a lot of the terms that I think we could probably spend the next, hour unpacking, especially, terms like valorization and surplus value. I feel like these we can elucidate these terms, everybody. So just if you've been following along so far, but you're struggling, don't worry. We will get into this a little bit more. He's giving us the broad strokes. So just for now, a lot of these things, leave question marks on them. Keep it as placeholders. We'll come back to them. So, but what I want to take from here is that so far we've got like this simplified, abstract model of a purified form of the processes of capitalism, its internal mechanisms, its dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
We're controlling for specific factors, and we are bracketing out other ones completely. You said that we excluded competition, we excluded other classes. I think we excluded a couple other ones that we excluded.
Foreign trade is a big one.
Foreign trade, supply, demand, right?
So start with an equilibrium of supply and demand. There's a lot of things that were excluded. Fixed capital, for example. We're just talking about constant capital. And fixed capital would be a certain outlay, whereas constant capital we're talking about the cycle, the value per cycle.
Okay, and we also have excluded finance capital, or at least banks, right?
Yeah, we're talking industrial capital.
Yeah, and so I read Paul Maddox's Theory as Critique towards the end of last year or beginning of this year, and I'm hoping to do a video essay on this channel about it. But at the beginning, he talks about he says, and I think he's drawing off of Grossman, and he's saying we can use terms from philosophy of science to talk about what it is that every scientist has to do in the development of a theory. And he talks about idealization and abstraction, and basically a big part of it is you have to assume a sort of ideal model, and you have to abstract out of the bigger context these different elements, and then part of that means bracketing and excluding various aspects of the thing. And then there are certain assumptions that you make that are merely methodological assumptions that are not taken to be true, but they're functional. You're going to treat them as though they're true so that they can help you get to the heart of the matter. And so he uses the example in physics where you'll assume a certain rate of decay, or you'll assume a certain you'll assume certain rates, or you'll even assume like everything, you'll assume something doesn't move when it actually does move, so that you can measure other things against it. I don't know my physics that well, so I can't really use the terminology he develops in that, or that he's drawing upon in that piece. But the point is that philosophy of science people have already established that everybody who's made fundamental contributions to fields of the sciences is doing these things. And so, but obviously there's also problems with doing that. And so one of the big problems with doing that, as far as the inheritance of this project, and we can come back to the, to mitigating circumstances, or what is it called? The counter tendencies, right? That,
yeah.
And that's something we'll have to get into, because this model that we're talking about, there are all these other aspects that get excluded that become a mitigating or counter tendencies that actually keep the complete breakdown from occurring, and kind of keep capitalism chugging along or coming back from recessions. But I think that the main point that you're going to bring up is that it's fundamentally, you can only mitigate it so far, right? And so we'll get more into what those counter tendencies are here in a second. But I want to bring it back to the misinterpretation of Das Kapital. So because he's doing this in Volume 1, he is making these simplifying assumptions. There's a kind of Marxist who took what he's doing as, this is the theory, and this is how the world works, when he was actually being pretty clear that he's doing like this ideal model abstraction thing, and he's going to add the other pieces back as he develops it. And so, in Volume 2, he adds back a bunch of stuff, and then in Volume 3, that's where you get to kind of like actually existing capitalism, how it's working today, right? And so, but Bernstein famously goes, well, Marx is wrong. Marx was wrong. Capitalism has no problem chugging along. It's actually adapting pretty well to these so-called contradictions. And so there is no... So Marx is wrong. There is no problem with the ultimate breakdown. And then Kautsky responds and is like, oh, yeah, well, Bernstein, you're wrong. Because Marx actually never said that. Marx never had a theory of breakdown or a theory of crisis that you're talking about. And so Bernstein's saying Marx is wrong because capitalism is not going to actually break down. Kautsky responds and says there never was a theory of breakdown. So, which is obviously a problem, because, I mean, there is, and I think Grossman points out there's no talk of a theory of surplus value. There's no talk of a theory of wages, but obviously Marx is developing a theory of surplus value and of wages. And so if we can say that there's a theory of surplus value and of wages, even though Marx never calls it such, then obviously we can talk about his theory of breakdown, because it is there, right? Am I tracking so far? So
yep. So
how did Bernstein with his his little model that he only took for 4 years and all of this, Bauer, I meant Bauer. Did Bauer, you were talking about him, did he write that before Bernstein came along and said Marx was wrong, actually?
No, Bernstein had already said that, but Bauer was the theorist that they went to, because he had done this schema showing a harmonious. I think he wrote it in 1904, and Bernstein's big work was 1899. But so Bauer did this schema showing this sort of what he called a harmonious growth, and I mean, he talked about capital having to readjust in the real world to population growth, and that would, so there would be I think he called that a sort of external reason for crisis, because you can't control the population growth, whereas Marx actually says that there is a law for population growth that is determined by the relations of capitalism. So yeah, like what you were saying, basically all of the theorists of the time, like you said, mistook Marx's abstraction for his concretization. The conclusions he drew from his abstraction were treated as his empirical conclusions of how the system worked, and so they drew wrong conclusions from that about Marx, about his breakdown theory. I mean, this was used to show that there was no breakdown theory by, Kautsky once he had become a reformist. Even Rosa Luxemburg, she made exactly the same mistake, but somehow she comes to the conclusion that there is a breakdown theory, but that it's located in consumption.
So she's the first under-consumptionist?
Well, I wouldn't say she's the first under consumption. You could probably call her a breakdown under consumptionist, because she still supports breakdown theory, and Grossman praises her for this. He calls it her great contribution. But her theory is that there's too much surplus value to be consumed in consumption. So she says that the problem is capitalism needs to keep finding new non-capitalist markets to export commodities into. But as the world industrializes, there'll be fewer and fewer of those, and so that becomes unsustainable. So that takes the problem away from production. That removes it to the realm of consumption. And so Grossman points out, well, that means there's too much surplus value, and yet actually capitalism has an insatiable thirst for surplus value. There's not enough of it being produced for the rate of accumulation to continue as it is going. So yeah, that was the main problem. And so Grossman's the first one to point out that these are abstractions. This is this is a simplification, and to assess what Marx actually did, we need to start from there and then work back towards the empirical real world findings by reintroducing the elements that were initially discarded in the abstraction and seeing what effect they have on that abstraction. So he calls these modifications and counter tendencies.
Counter tendencies, right?
Yeah.
So, and a way of thinking about
postpone or speed up the tendency to break down.
Like if you think about okay, so you have a human organism, or you have a living organism, and there's inertia, and it's going to die. But there are things that can keep it alive longer, and so at the level you have a human, there are things that you can do as a human that will keep you alive longer. There are practices and habits and ways of being in the world that will keep you from falling off of cliffs. We can put up guardrails that'll make it less likely that you'll go off of the cliff. You can eat food and sleep properly. That'll extend your lifespan, right? So those are in a sense we're dying from birth, but there are counter tendencies that can keep us alive longer. And capitalism is also dying since birth, but there are counter tendencies that can keep it alive longer. So what?
Yeah, I liken it. That's a great analogy, and I also sort of liken it to a bodybuilder who's addicted to muscle gain, because every time he gains or she gains a certain amount of muscle, they then have to work even harder than before to go up again and gain even more muscle. And eventually, they get top heavy, plus they're aging at the same time and they can't keep it up. It's the same with capitalism. The bigger it gets, the more surplus value it has to produce than it did before to keep that addiction to the muscle gain in this analogy going.
I like that analogy a lot. I think I remember you using it actually. And so I do want to talk about some of those counter tendencies, but first I want to bring in, I want to talk a little bit more about so we've got Bernstein, Bauer, Kautsky, Luxemburg. We haven't talked about Rupert Hilferding yet. So as far as expansion packs and add-ons to capital as the fundamental project of critique of political economy, one of the problems, first of all, is that a lot of them thought that instead of a critique of political economy, that it was itself Marxist political economy, which, if you read it as such, then he's hardly a footnote to Ricardo. And that is a mistake that a lot of people make. But I still am, because I haven't read all of their big contributions and add-ons, I don't know which ones make these big errors and in which ways, but so Luxemburg's The Accumulation of Capital was a really big, important expansion pack that talks about imperialism, colonialism, uneven development. And that was very impactful on Lenin. And is this the work that where she talks about all of this? Where she talks
Yeah, that's her big work, and that's her big assessment of Marx's Capital.
All right. And then Hilferding they're all kind of responding to like, well, capitalism's not failing yet, or it hasn't failed yet. And in fact, like the workers are getting kind of comfy in Germany right now. And so, the unions have had some big wins. We have a big socialist party. Hey, maybe reformism is the way. And then obviously you have the people who are looking at countries not in the imperial core who are going, well, we're not seeing those developments here, and the workers are not comfy. And in fact, we don't even have a fucking proletariat yet, so what the hell? And so, that's Luxemburg and Lenin both being like, there's something going on here. And then Hilferding comes along with finance capital as well. And finance capital is a big addition. Could you say a few words about like what it contributes and how it does or does not skew the understanding of capital?
So the problem with Hilferding is that he sees finance capital as this kind of pre-socialist tendency leading up to a straightforward, because he sees accumulation as harmonious. He sees this justifies the reformist path, because he's saying it's naturally going to evolve into socialism because there's no breakdown tendency. So all Hilfing, all we conclude from that is that you have a reformist party. It participates in the election process, and as this harmonious accumulation gets to a certain point, finance capital starts to act as a socializing force, and there's some truth in that, but I think it's one of those one-sided ways of looking at it from Hilferding's perspective. And he starts saying things like, if we nationalize 6 banks, then we're pretty much on the way to getting a full socialist economy. And he sees the monopolization of production as a harmonizing factor as well. So in a way, that's almost like a free market. That's almost like a free market perspective, because you just leave it to its own devices and it will continue to monopolize, which is a kind of perverse way. It's almost like an inverted free market way of looking at it. So yeah, that's where he draws his reformist conclusions from this sort of natural monopolization and this harmonious accumulation. Because there's no breakdown tendency, there's no need for a revolution.
So, and the main thing that mediates the breakdown tendencies and contradictions of capital for him, for Hilferding, is just finance capital itself. So just centralized banks being able to manipulate currency or get money to people in advance is like
Yeah.
the solvent.
Yeah, he sees the banks as the the part playing the most important role rather than industry, whereas Grossman and Lenin see it the other way around. They see the fusion of banking capital and industrial capital as more as industrial capital absorbing banking capital, and banking capital serving industrial capital, whereas Hilferding sees it the other way around. And that was true in the early phases of capitalism. Industry was more reliant on banking capital, for reserves, for reserve funds and that sort of thing, and credit. But the older capitalism gets, the more independent and self-financing the monopoly industrial corporations become.
Okay. And so, in a sense, he's taking one of the Hilferding is taking one of the things that was excluded from Volume 1, and it's one of the counter tendencies, and it has some counter tendency effect, especially for early on, you're saying, but Hilferding's taking this sort of, he's inflating it as like this is the counter tendency that Marx didn't see. Of course, I understand, haven't read Volume 3 yet, but I think he gets into banking in Volume 3, does he not? Or is that Volume 2?
I mean, it's in both, but the thing is, there's more detail in Volume 3. That's the thing. Okay. It goes into the real detail, the real crux of it.
I'm sure Hilferding did not see that, did he?
I don't know.
Okay.
Because it's not clear to me whether they just didn't. Some of them hadn't read Capital, or they had and they'd Volume 3, or they had and they just didn't get it, or just saw it as an extension of Volume 2. And obviously there was a delay in the publication of Volume 3.
Right.
So there was a wait, and that must have contributed to some of this confusion. But Grossman's writing in 1929, Law of Accumulation. So he's writing about the last. So Volume 3's been out for over 30 years by then. So there's really no excuses by that point. No one has produced a clear explanation of the structure of Capital, especially Volume 3. No one's cleared up this confusion, so he feels compelled to write his book and try and clarify these things. I wouldn't say that Marx sees banking as a counter tendency per se. It's more that at the earliest stages of capitalism, when it's starting in its earliest epoch of development, industry is dependent on banking just for reserves and for credit. But as industry builds itself up and it becomes more independent and therefore more self-financing, and companies today like Apple and Google and Amazon, they can operate largely without the banks. And I would say now that they're quite keen to just get rid of the banks. They're 0% interest rates for them aren't a problem, because that is a counter tendency in that it enables the cheapening of capital for borrowing and lending. But they can do that themselves. They can a lot of the major corporations can do a lot of their own lending and borrowing and all that sort of thing, whereas the banks, they're really concerned about the interest rate, because they earn their money from interest, and interest is a form of profit, but it's a slice of the pie. Interest, it's not where profit arises from. So profit is a form that surplus value takes, and then that can be split into various forms, such as interest and rent. And so the banks are really a rentier form of, so the profit they're making is really a rentier form, and that's eating into the amount of surplus value that is available to industrial capital. So the whole way through capitalism, there's a struggle developing, and as the time goes on, it's industry that's tending to win that struggle and marginalize banking capital.
Okay, so not everything that gets excluded from the ideal model in Volume 1 is a counter tendency, right? But
yes, that's the landlord's not a counter tendency at all. Always going to be a class that's eating into the surplus value that could otherwise be dedicated to production.
Okay. And so, and so it sounds to me like Bernstein and later Kautsky, but also Bauer and Hilferding, they're all kind of the reformist vein. And that Rosa and Lenin are obviously revolutionary socialists. And so let's talk.
I'm still getting what you're saying.
It says reconnection successful on OBS Studio, so we should be back, but I'm not gonna resume until I see the green light. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that, folks. What was I saying? Oh, it seems like the reason people care about arguing against a breakdown theory of capital or arguing for it is usually something about reform versus revolution, and it's controversial because you have reformists who are basically like, well, we can just worry about getting some reformist wins for the working class in the short term and waiting because capital will undermine itself. And you have revolutionaries who say there is no breakdown that's actually going to end capitalism and we can't wait for it. We just need to make it happen right now. But then you also have a more Grossmanite approach to revolution that says, no, we always have to be planning and getting ready for it. It's coming though, and basically we just prepare ourselves for it. Am I? Yeah, gosh, I'm hearing myself echo, but I'm about to go grab my coffee. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how the debate revolved around breakdown and was egged on by assumptions about how the revolution needs to happen or doesn't need to happen, and talk about these different people: Bernstein, Kautsky, Bauer, Hilferding, Rosa, Lenin. Let's talk about their kinds of different positions, and then Grossman, why he thinks they're some of them might be onto something here, or maybe not.
Okay.
I know that's a big question.
So let's just divide it up into simple. There's pure reformists who don't believe in getting rid of capitalism and implementing socialism. They just want to reform capitalism, make it better, make it work for more people. Then there's the reformists who are socialists and are in favour of socialism, but they see it as an ethical or psychological project. And again, this is within like a reformist road to socialism, and they want socialism not because capitalism is going to collapse and is unsustainable, but because socialism would be better for the whole population. And the real reason that we need to get rid of capitalism is for ethical reasons. So Kautsky sees war as a symptom of the ruling class being uncivilized, and so you need the working class to become the ruling class and make the means of production socialist to bring about a properly civilized society. Hilferding sees, as I said, a reformist road as a natural process emerging from the monopolization of industry and the financialization of the system. That's more or less how it was for the reformist Roders. Rosa Luxemburg's breakdown theory, which Grossman criticizes as being a sort of wait for breakdown to happen and then go. I think that was actually quite unfair, because he's also very keen on her. I kind of feel that Grossman had conflicting or contradicting an analysis of Luxemburg, because he's very complimentary about Reform versus Revolution, her pamphlet, which really stresses the need for communists and revolutionaries to support struggles for reforms, because it prepares the working class in struggle, and B, because you're not standing aside and letting the working class do all the work and sort of separating yourselves from them, because if you do that, it's going to be harder for revolutionaries to influence reformists. And the fact is, as we know right now, the vast majority of workers are either kind of apolitical or they're reformists to some extent or another. And Grossman's very clear, because he was obviously criticised as by some of these reformists and by other communists as having a kind of mechanical, automatic theory of revolution, where he's divorced his theory from the class struggle. But that's not what he says at all. He's saying that knowledge of the breakdown theory is like the seed that we're trying to sow in people's minds, and the class struggle is the fertilizer, or whatever you want to call it, that turns that seed into a flowering consciousness. And so it's dialectical. You can only implant that seed by joining in the class struggle, and the class struggle can only grow that seed into consciousness through the process of class struggle itself. And so what Grossman is getting at is that the capitalist class is compelled to attack the wages and the living conditions of the working class, and presumably because presumably he's taking human nature into account when he's talking about this, presumably because the working class wants to survive and carry on living, it is compelled to fight back. And so when you get a partial breakdown, you get a struggle over the distribution of surplus value. So when the capitalist class is the one that is succeeding in that struggle, the amount of surplus value spread out across the working class is thinner. When it's the other way around and the working class is winning the battles, it's got a bigger proportion, a bigger share of the surplus value, and that means there's less surplus value that can be dedicated to production and accumulation. And so that in itself can contribute to the onset of the next crisis. It can bring it forward. So Grossman's very clear that the class struggle can strengthen or weaken the breakdown tendency. And it's almost ironic that it's when the working class is succeeding the most that the breakdown tendency will be stronger. And of course that means the job of revolutionaries is to point that out and say, this is actually going to snap back. This is going to force the capitalist class to come back even harder than it did last time, because if it doesn't, the system will break down, and of course the working class will suffer as a result. And that's why the job of the revolutionary is to say to the working class, you've got to go all the way and fight for socialism. Obviously, the period of accumulation itself totally influences the outcomes, or not totally, but largely influences the outcomes, and that's why we haven't seen a world socialist revolution for the point of time we're in. And looking back, the capitalist class has been able to stop at a certain point in its attacks without pushing harder, because there's been enough surplus value to dedicate to accumulation at that point in time. And so they've been able to negotiate a certain settlement. Workers have been able to, the majority of the working class hasn't come to a point where the system's become so intolerable that it feels compelled to overthrow capitalism. So there's all these things going on, and what I would say is that in a final breakdown, the capitalist class will either feel compelled to, will essentially be compelled to bite off more than it can chew in a way that it hasn't in the past. And essentially it won't be able to pay enough people enough wages for the working class to subsist within a capitalist system. But the point I'm just saying is that reformism has won so far for a reason,
right?
And that is that the distribution of surplus value that has been available. There's been enough available for reformism to win out.
Well, and there's probably a handful of the counter tendencies that Marx does talk about that are involved, as well as other counter tendencies that I think theory tends to contribute. And I think Vivek Chibber, in his recent conversation with Slavoj Žižek, he talks about one counter tendency that does not get considered, he says, by the older New Left, either one. Both get it wrong, and that is that, usually like the New Left would see the reason capitalism keeps going along and the workers aren't organizing. The New Left says, oh, well, it's because of these outside factors, and there's various outside factors that, or it might be like desire, and, people desire their own self-undermining, or, there's all these various ways of that theory can talk about it. But then Vivek Chibber goes, no, what people aren't thinking about is like how when you're super precarious and a lot's riding on your job, it is in your self-interest, in your short-term self-interest, to not work in solidarity with other people. It's a little gaslighting and condescending to say, oh, well, the workers just don't know what's in their best interests. But at the end of the day, like, keeping your head down low and just making sure that you don't get fired is in your short-term interest. The point is, obviously, it's not in your long-term interest, because this is not sustainable. And what happens to your coworkers can happen to you, even if you manage to stay on. But the thing is like, to be less condescending. I think Chibber's point is like, it's a very condescending stance to just say, no, the workers just don't know what's in their interest. Well, they do know what's in their short-term interest. They do know how, generally speaking, how to survive day to day. The issue is this longer-term perspective that they don't have, and this is where you're talking about the seed and the fertilization. And so how was that seed being sown at the time that Grossman writes this? Well, if I remember correctly, I think you said that there was all these books coming out like about, oh, there's not going to be a great crisis, and then Grossman's like, y'all are a bunch of idiots, and then the great crisis happens like right after he says that. Is that, I'm summarizing, is this who said it's not going to happen famously right before it happens, and then was this book, The Law of Accumulation, published right before it happens, and how does it go down, and what is that Great Crisis?
Yeah, so none of the reformists saw the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression coming. In Grossman's book, he says there's a brewing crisis in America, and he basically does this by looking at the stock market. He's like, the stock market's going wild. All of the capital is being thrown at the stock market into speculation, because there's an overaccumulation of capital that can't be reinvested profitably in production. That's why it's going into speculation. That's why the stock market's going crazy. So he doesn't say, oh, we're on the verge of a Great Depression, but he calls it he uses the word massive. He says there's a massive overaccumulation of crisis, and there's a massive crash coming. 2 years before that, so that was his book comes out early 1929. Wall Street crashes in September, I think. 2 years before that, Kautsky says capitalism stands on firmer ground than ever before, and it's recovered from the war, and this shows that there's no internal breakdown mechanism, because the theory of breakdown had been debated this whole time, but it mostly had been dismissed or misunderstood, and so this is what Grossman's trying to fix. I just want to come back on your other point about why isn't the working class rising up and overthrowing capitalism? Is it just because they've been brainwashed or something? Like, obviously, the mass media is very powerful and influential, and uses all kinds of misdirection. Probably doesn't understand capitalism itself, so is quite happy to talk about the inexhaustibility of capitalism and the wonders of capitalism. The thing though that Grossman points out is that the working classes' living standards can rise, whilst the rate of exploitation is also rising, because one of the counter tendencies is devaluation. So the more abundantly commodities are produced, the cheaper they get, and so even though the value of your labor power also is devalued, the commodities that you're buying have been devalued. And so as time goes on under capitalism, outside of crisis periods, you can actually buy more commodities than you did in the period before. So obviously there's problems with, because this is, some of the reformists were like, well, Marx was right it felt like Marx was right at the time because the working class was very poor, but actually there's been a very large or substantial rise in the living standards of the working class since Marx died, and so this proves that he was wrong, and there's no reason for the working class to overthrow the ruling class for economic reasons. But then you think, and Grossman's like, well, Marx never said that the working class's living standards always fall or never rise. He agreed that it did rise because capitalism becomes more productive as time goes on. Because another one of the counter tendencies is innovation, which enables the productivity of labour to rise. The expansion of production, even on the same method of production without innovation, is also a counter tendency that will sustain the rate of profit where it is. But yeah, so if you're cheapening the commodities sufficiently, you're producing more surplus value per commodity in the sense that more of the labourers' working time is becoming surplus value. That's what deepening the rate of exploitation is. It's the theft of more surplus labour time than before, in contrast to necessary labour time, which is the amount you're keeping, the amount of value you're keeping to sustain your own living standards.
Right.
Right. And then at the same time, commodities are getting cheaper, so you can buy more commodities than before. And obviously, it's not something that equalizes out across the whole working class. Like, a portion of the working class will become unemployed, a portion will get a bit poorer, but maybe the majority of the working class with each cycle, after the crisis has passed, will actually be better off in terms of their real wage, which is actually in technical terms measured as the number of commodities consumed.
So consumerism, war, and innovation are three. Oh, I added war just now, actually. I was going to bring it up as a question, but these are all counter tendencies. And I think you talk about war in Socialism or Extinction. But you haven't talked about it here as a counter tendency. It sounds like you said Kautsky was like, capitalism's managed to recover from the war, and the point I think that you would bring up, if I'm not mistaken, is that war is actually one of the main ways that capitalism recovers from its internal crises. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I forgot to say, Kautsky thought that one of he when he was because he was initially pro breakdown tendency, and then later on he revoked the idea and became reformist. But even when he was pro breakdown tendency, he was saying that he's saying that the ruling class is uncivilized, that they will impose war on the population, and they will then be overthrown because of that. Whereas Grossman's saying actually war can postpone the breakdown tendency. There are parts of there are two sides to war. Like the money that gets put towards war is obviously a drain on surplus value that could otherwise be dedicated to the civilian economy and the production of commodities. So initially it's a drain in that sense, but in the long term it does two things. It centralizes capital because the victors obviously collect tribute that they can then put towards their own accumulation, and the other side of it is that it speeds up the devaluation of both wages and existing capital. So if you've got a surplus of capital, or this overaccumulation of capital, it needs to be reconverted into productive capital. And one of the ways of doing that is to devalue it. But when you've got like an absolutely massive amount of overaccumulated capital that needs to be reconverted, like the usual methods of devaluation don't suffice. So
what does it mean? So what does it mean to devalue? So okay, because it doesn't
cheapen.
Yeah, I know. I get. So okay, you've overaccumulated capital. So what does that mean? You've got someone who's got a monopoly on a bunch of on an area of the industry, like they've got a bunch of factories or something like that, and these are worth too much and they need to be devalued. Is that what you're saying? Like what? I'm not quite following.
They can't invest in it. It wouldn't be profitable to invest in it so they can't expand the means of production that they have because it wouldn't be profitable to do so. The rate of return would be zero, or whatever.
So what's an example? What's a good example from either right now or back then of a company that is not, like, it's just like not worth investing in? It's become so unprofitable.
Yeah, so let's say the car industry, like in Detroit, it's the it's become unprofitable for the capitalists that owned those factories to keep them open at all, because the rate of profit was so low, or the massive profit that was being produced wasn't enough to cover the costs of producing additional profit for more investment, to cover the growing wages of a growing population or growing working population, and for their own consumption. So you get a class struggle where they're trying to attack the wages of the workers in those factories, and it becomes cheaper to just close those factories down, offer those workers jobs in other industries, mainly the services industry rather than manufacturing, and then instead effectively move those factories to China or Indonesia or India or wherever, where the labor is cheaper, and the workers there are not, they're just not going to be struggling for the same wages, because they're all, because relative to the wages they're already on, this new employment opportunity is going to represent an improvement for them. So it becomes the easiest option in terms of the struggle, but also from the capitalist perspective, but also in terms of growing the rate of exploitation, the amount of capital they're able to invest profitably. Does that make a bit more sense?
I think so. And so is it primarily the competition between capitalists that makes it so that they can have a huge operation going, but that it's no longer profitable because they've had to keep lowering their prices to stay competitive with the other capitalists, but at the same time you've got, your workers want fair wages and the cost of living is going up, and so that's one thing that they need to satisfy, and then they gotta be investing in research and development and advertising and all these other things, but then they also want their own cut of the pie, and they've also got probably they owe money to banks and investors and shit that they've also got to be returning on, and so sometimes they're just like, you know what, like, let's either call it a loss or close down while we're ahead. Hey, we could either, and then this is where, so am I on track so far? Because we can talk about re-rationalization in a second, but am I on track?
Yeah, can I just clear up a couple of things?
Yeah, please, yeah.
So there's two things I just want to clear up. Competition is really important, and the effects of competition, but I don't want to give the impression that the crisis or the dependence of accumulation lies with competition. Competition comes after the fact that the key problem is valorization. If you're, which means producing enough value. So you're a capitalist, right? You've got a certain amount of value. You need to increase that value because that's what enables you to invest. So it's dialectical. It's one is dependent on the other. So if you're not creating enough value, you can't increase the amount of value you're producing, investing in new value to produce new value. So that is the key thing. Now, the reason competition is important is because it accelerates that process. Because if the amount of, so devaluation will not only devalue the amount of the commodities because there's more commodities being produced, but it will devalue subsequently the value of the means of production, i.e. the constant capital. It will devalue that as well. So that will help postpone a crisis. But when you get that devaluation of constant capital, there's suddenly less value. So the pie is smaller relative to the number of capitalists. So then competition intensifies, and one capitalist, let's say one capitalist out of four, will have that bit much more capital, that or be the first one to come up with the evolution in technology that enables them to produce more first and to devalue their commodities. So they then benefit from cutting prices,
right?
And so they get more customers, and the other three capitalists lose out. And then they have to then either adopt the new technology, and so that they can cut their own prices to catch up, or cut them by even more, or they go bust and they go out of business, leaving fewer capitalists, and that does tend to happen over time, relatively, and or they have to be absorbed by the capitalists that outcompeted them. So you have this dialectical process, back and forth process of devaluation and competition, really influencing and impacting each other. The other thing I just want to clarify is that when you get to the point of overaccumulation and a partial breakdown, so we could think of it as a partial overaccumulation, not an absolute one, and so you get a partial breakdown. That's also necessary. It's not just, oh, we've hit the buffers and there's a purpose to it. It helps to spur the competition that I'm talking about, the devaluation that I'm talking about. At that point, the something has to change to get the process of accumulation underway again. So you get this portion of capital that production that basically becomes worthless, because firstly you need to devalue it, and secondly that enables you to innovate, and the old means of production become useless because the new means of production is better at doing what the old methods were doing. It can do it faster and cheaper. So then you get this so effectively at that point it's not just devaluation of capital, but it's also destruction of capital. But war will speed that process up. It will destroy that capital that the capital that would have otherwise been destroyed through just disuse will be destroyed quicker, and other parts of capital will also be destroyed that weren't even being disused, but the capitalist needs to speed up the devaluation of, so that they can move on with expansion and innovation. But they won't necessarily be thinking of it like this.
I was gonna say, because it's not, and I think that's a big error on most people when they first start thinking about capital critique, right? They usually think it's about greed. They think it's about. I actually heard a pretty big video essayist in TheoryTube recently say that, the capitalists want this, the capitalists want that, the capitalists don't want the workers doing this, the capitalists don't. There's a whole video like that, and this person has a huge reach on their channel, and I was just like, oh, this is painful, because it's not about what they want, and it's not about how they understand it, right? This is a system, and it's functioning in a certain way. How they interpret it might be different. So what does it look like from the businessman's standpoint? How would they typically be thinking in this time of crisis leading up to a war?
I mean, I think it's important to establish what they want, but I think we also and how that affects the class struggle and day-to-day life and everything. I'm not dismissing that at all, but it's also important to know where that is what that's manifesting from. In terms of war, I mean, there are quotes from ruling class capitalists, things like, what we need is a good war. But what they mean is, and there's one on business, I think it was the website Business Insider, that's in my book, Socialism or Extinction, at the top of the chapter on war, and it says, do we need another war to get things going again, because there's been so much stagnation. But there will also be, I can't remember who it was now, but there's a quote from Ruling Class Capitalist from the period where imperialism was really thought more of as colonialism, and he says what you need to do to prevent a civil war at home is to wage war abroad, so that you're sucking those resources back into your own country, which effectively means, you know, even though he doesn't think of it, he's not think of it in this way, but he effectively means we have to accumulate overseas and bring that back into the domestic, bring the revenue from that back into the domestic economy, so that the domestic population isn't, you know, fighting over too small a slice of the pie, sort of thing.
Sorry, you're cutting out just a little bit here. It says on my side that I have an excellent connection. Let's see, I'm going to do an internet speed test, but kind of, it's been for like the last 15 minutes, you've been kind of lower resolution. Your speech got a little garbled at a couple of points, but I didn't want to cut you off because this has been really good. I think it's so far, I'd say everything has been understandable, and my internet speed is fast, so I think it's probably just the fact that you're coming at us from over the ocean, and so, you know, it's going to be a little unreliable from time to time. But if it got a lot worse, we could always just restart the call, but we'll see. So what I'm hearing, though, is some capitalists used to be a lot more mask off about this kind of thing, is one thing that you're saying. And that it's a sort of basic, I think that actually, not from an economic standpoint, but just from a basic political philosophy standpoint, it's, I think, a basic truism that to prevent a civil war, you go to war with someone else. And so this is, I mean, I don't think there's a person in a position of power who does statecraft who doesn't know that. And that, it seems like in capitalism, in American capitalism, you could have people who don't know that, because we get some real idiots in power today, supposedly in power. But the thing is like, obviously the CIA and, like there are bigger forces at work than say, Obama or Trump, right? And what they understand. But I think even someone like Trump can understand at a sort of gut level that scapegoating an outsider can kind of bring in a sort of unity. And obviously right now we're seeing the squad, the 6 most progressive Democrats, the supposed outsiders, all just voted in lockstep with the Democrats and a lot of the Republicans for $40 billion towards Ukraine, plus an additional few billion ostensibly like per week, as well as like it's already been several billion. And I mean, honestly, we were putting billions towards Ukraine, I think, since 2008, 2014, something like that, right? Because obviously we've also been involved over there since before this. So when Biden says that all of this is unprovoked and we didn't see this coming, and he's lying, because we've also got speeches from him where he was talking about how this was guaranteed to happen. So he's acting surprised now, but it's not a surprise. So that's coming at the end of, so here we are, like, gearing up for war, one that's supposedly, they're saying it's going to be protracted now, which means this is going to be going on for a long time, and they're gearing up for it to go on for a long time. And, so what you bring to this situation, as well as to COVID and everything that's been going on for the last couple of years now, you bring a theory of crisis analysis that, what is all of this manifesting from, to put it in your words. You said manifesting from earlier, which is also to say there's like base stuff going on, and now what we see and have strong opinions about and feel and deal with on a daily basis at this more superstructural level is downstream from what's going on at this base level. And so what you're doing is what Grossman was doing, leading up to the Great Depression. He was saying, hey, everyone, all you socialists, supposed socialists, who seem to think that capitalism is going to have no problem, who are supposed to be, bringing consciousness of what's occurring to the working class, you're unaware apparently of like what the systemic critique of capitalism is supposed to be showing us is going on right now, and you're not even equipping yourselves or other people with the right language or kind of understanding of what causes these things. And then of course shit happened, and then Grossman stayed pretty marginalized by the Frankfurt School as well as by mainstream Marxists. And then, so where you said he's saying that we need to be sowing the seed of an understanding of what causes these things into a fertile soil, which is, the class organizing. Instead, we don't have that. And so people looking at the crises today, whether it be COVID or, gearing up for a long protracted war, people are regular workers. So there's what leftists say, and then there's what regular workers say. And what regular workers tend to think right now is that it's this is all just being caused by inflation, which is being caused by printing money. And that's the meme right now, because the people of the Rothbardian school and the libertarians and the neoliberals, they organized around long-term goals and developed a sense of like, how are we going to strategically disseminate information and influence people in key positions of power so that when crises occur, the interpretation of those crises is beneficial for our class interests. And they did that explicitly as far back as in the, I think, 40s, maybe 50s. And instead, the left has not done that. So to me, it seems like ideologically speaking, the war of how we ideologically interpret crises is being won by neoliberals, even on the left, or people on the left are still influenced by this. They don't have a good comeback to what inflation is. They don't have a good comeback to why we're really going to war. There's just kind of these tropes about, the right wing is just it just has so much power because people are just so racist, and we just want to and that's that explains Trump, that explains Putin. Also, the people who get duped by Trumps and Putins, they're also to blame for COVID because that was all avoidable. If they just worn their masks and practiced safe distancing, everything would have been fine. But if we pull back a few layers of this onion and get a little deeper, you've talked about previously about how there was already a great recession building up in 2019, and a lot of these things, I don't know, like how do you apply this analysis today to the current situation? How do you think the left needs to be thinking about these current crises through this lens? How would that be done, and how would that be disseminated to workers so that they can understand that the inflation and the wars and the pandemic response and everything like that is not these standalone isolated instances, but are related to something bigger? How would you talk about that to your average worker or to an activist who wants to be able to think about these things and think about how they should be sowing these seeds of consciousness?
Yeah, it's very difficult, but one of the things I've been trying to do is use empirical data that is showing how things are on a downward trajectory, and then pointing to the fact that these can only be explained by the theory. So I tend not to start with the theory because that is obviously difficult to grasp, and it took me a long time to grasp. But we can point to things like GDP growth in the high-income, what the World Bank calls the high-income countries. That has tended to slow down every decade for the last 50 years. Productivity growth, separate from that, is like a slightly different measure, has been spluttering around 1% for over a decade, and not much higher in the previous decades. The big one for me is that the energy return on investment has fallen for fossil fuel from 100 to 1 in 1930 to there was an estimate in 2019 estimating it at between 3 and 6 to 1. So that means the amount of energy being returned on each dollar of investment is falling relatively on a secular historical basis over the last century towards an absolute zero. That is that. And there's a guy called I can't remember what he does exactly, but there's a guy called Sid Smith who did a lecture called How to Enjoy the End of the World, and he explains all this, because he says it's not just fossil fuel that's affected, it's all of the energy markets. There's also things like the age of the average S&P 500 company has fallen from 60 years about 40 years ago to about 18 years ago. From 60 several decades ago to 18 years. So the average average S&P 500 company starting up today doesn't last many years compared to in the past. So that's showing us something. That's showing a clear historical trend towards a point where new capitalist monopolies just aren't going to last very long. It's obvious that there's a centralization of wealth going on. Inequality, the rising inequality points to that. The monopolization of production. There's loads of websites that have done studies showing who owns what, and clearing up this sort of illusion of choice, where in the real world most companies are owned by the same shareholders, or they have the dominant shareholder of that company is the same across most companies you can think of. So that's a centralization of wealth that we can point to. And how sustainable is a centralization of wealth? It's quite obvious that can't be indefinitely sustainable. There are studies showing that the general rate of profit has declined on a secular historical basis from peak to now a trough. So it goes up and down. No one's saying that it doesn't. No one's saying that it declines in a linear way, but on average it does, and towards zero. So there's all this empirical data that points towards a decline in the system and a sort of an approaching absolute limit. Prices, again, commodity prices. I know we've got inflation at the moment, but if you look at the historical prices, the prices of production are falling towards zero. And this is because in the age of automation, which we're now undergoing, and I can speak a bit more on that in terms of the theoretical reasons for the rise of automation, but it is capable of removing one of, if not the biggest source of expenditure for capital, which is the wage. So if you can replace the bulk of your workers with automated machinery that works faster, doesn't take breaks, doesn't go on holiday, doesn't need sick pay, you're going to save a hell of a lot of money, and that you are able to produce more quickly, and then that has a seriously accelerating influence on the devaluation of commodities and capital. So yeah, we can point to all of these things. And then in terms of, oh, well, does that mean I should be an anarchist, or does that mean I should be a Marxist that favours a socialist state? I would point to revolution also being an evolution. A revolution is the last evolutionary step of a whole series of evolutionary steps. And a lot of my theory on this is pointing out that you can't run ahead of evolutionary the natural pace of evolutionary development. If you try to, you will bite off more than you can chew. And this is again why I kind of like say stuff like, well, I think the Soviet Union probably emerged prematurely and that's why it failed. Like, it didn't have the technology that we have now with automation and digitalization and that sort of thing. So I say socialism is becoming an economic necessity for the first time, and I point to all this empirical evidence that I've just been pointing to. And so what have we got at the moment? We've gone from monopoly capitalism to state monopoly capitalism, where the monopoly capitalist corporations are increasingly dependent on the state for subsidies, for contracts, and for facilities. So, for example, the pharmaceutical companies, the monopoly pharmaceutical companies, have closed down most of their research and development facilities because they can't afford to keep them open. So they started using, the state facilities almost exclusively for their own research and development. So what we have is this ever closer intertwining of the state, which is a capitalist state, and monopoly capital. So what I would say is, what comes after state monopoly capital, it in evolutionary terms, it seems to me that it would be something that we could call state monopoly socialism. And then after that, that enables us to stop the collapse in production, get production going again, so private enterprise becomes a state enterprise. And then as those state enterprises become increasingly productive and prices continue to fall towards zero, everyone's consumption rises probably almost exponentially, possibly, I don't know, but it will rise at a continually accelerating rate. And then at that point, the state starts to become irrelevant. And I think that's how you get rid of the state once and for all.
I've got a bunch of things I want to say as a follow-up to also, I want to hear you expand on a couple of things here, but really quick, I'm just wondering if you could like hang up and call me back, and we'll see if that makes the connection any better, because there's been a lip syncing lag here for a while, and it's fine. It's not a big deal, but it's worth trying to see if we can fix it.
Okay, hang on a minute then.
All right.
Oh God, how do I hang up?
And actually, how about this? Actually, I've got a great idea, Ted. I'm gonna play a song, play some music, so that we can also get refreshed really quick. I'll get more coffee, run to the restroom. Let's just call this like a 3-minute break. I think that this is such a difficult topic, and that it's very big brain stuff, that I have a tremendous ratio of likes compared to actual viewers. And I think the reason I have a tremendous ratio of likes to actual viewers is because people see the importance of what you're talking about, and they realize this is stuff they actually need to understand, but they also realize they're not in the headspace for it in the moment. And so I think a lot of people are liking it with a plan of coming back to it. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate that, everybody. So what we're going to do is step away for a brief second, and then we'll continue, because this is I feel like we've gone so much deeper into this than anything I've seen on the topic so far, and that I want to go a little deeper still, because this is going to help me get my footing so that I can do some of this research on my own, and then we can come back together and talk about it a little bit more once I actually have, I feel like, internalized it all a little bit better. So, but
Yeah.
we're going to talk more about innovation and re-rationalization and outsourcing, merging, automation, state-enforced monopolies, and the ways that a lot of this stuff is upstream from the stuff that we've been seeing over the last few years. We're also going to talk a little bit more about some of those mitigating counter tendencies, and I think I think we'll talk a little bit more about value itself, and what we'll talk a little bit more about value itself and what's going on with this idea of like reaching a 0 point and the different ways that things can go from there. And so, but yeah, I'll be right back. I'm going to just play some music, folks. I'm going to go to the be right back screen. See you all.
All right.
See you all soon.
I'll call you back in a minute.
Yeah, we'll take a few minutes. Here we go. should be getting going any minute here. Once Ted's gonna call me back here in a second. Yo. Here, let me, can you hear me? Oh, hell no. You can't hear me?
Sorry.
Oh, there we
Yeah,
go.
I can hear you now.
There we go. Great. Well, welcome back. I hope that you feel refreshed. It still looks a little choppy. You did like the router reset and everything like that?
I haven't reset anything. I just hung up.
Oh, okay. Well,
That was fine. My signal's fine.
oh, okay. You did like an internet speed test. There's a
Yeah.
There's a thing with like you can reset it and it'll speed up your priority if there's a lot of people using internet in your neighborhood. I don't know if it's the same in London, but it can work sometimes to reset. But you're just a little choppy, but it should be fine. I can hear you definitely, and I think that the people who are tuning in for the right reasons. I mean, obviously, you're an attractive looking guy, and people probably want to see words coming out of your mouth in sync, but like I said, the people coming for the right reasons care more about what you have to say than objectifying you. So, you know, blurry should be fine. Like, okay. So I said I wanted to talk about a few things, but one of the things that I didn't mention that I was thinking as I was getting ready, I had to eat some oranges, some of these orange slices and pancakes that Anne brought me like 2 hours ago. I just ate them as fast as I could. So when you first called back, I was like, I need 2 more minutes because I was like shoving my face with like pancakes, and so now I feel good because I didn't have breakfast. And but one of the things I was thinking about while consuming that was under consumptionism as the main way the left currently interprets crises. And so we have from the right wing this interpretation, and neoliberals more generally, this interpretation of, oh, well, these crises are being caused by government interventions and by printing money and by, you know, corporate greed, without thinking about all the stuff that we're talking about, obviously. But then there's like this more leftist approach that says the issue is under consumptionism. And I think, you know, Michael Roberts famously, well, I don't know how famous, this is a pretty niche debate, but Michael Roberts has been critiquing David Harvey for being a primarily under consumptionist. And we were talking earlier about how Rosa Luxemburg basically has an under-consumptionist theory. And so I wanted to talk about what is under-consumptionism, how does it relate to this theory of breakdown, what does it get right, what does it get wrong, and how are we undermined when it comes to raising class consciousness if all we use is an under-consumptionist theory of crisis.
Oh, I've got an echo again.
Oh no!
Is it gone? It's gone. It's gone.
I can't hear it, so.
Yeah, it's gone. So under consumptionism, it can mean quite a few different things. But I'm just noting down what you asked. Yeah, it can mean a few different things. I think the main one, without boring everyone about what it means in all regards, but the main one is that the working class is underpaid, presumably by the greedy capitalists. And I'm not saying capitalists aren't greedy. I mean, but when we're talking about understanding the system, it's almost like greed is more of a symptom or a byproduct than a generating starting point. So because there's two sides to capital, capitalist accumulation when it comes to surplus value. There's the production of surplus value, and there's the realization of surplus value. So the production happens, although under consumptionists won't talk about this at all usually, but the production of surplus value comes because the labourer's labour time is exploited. It's the theft of surplus labour time. That's what value is. That is then realised as profit through commodity sales. So if you're not paying your workers enough, they can't buy the products that they are making, and so there's a shortage in the realization of profit.
Right.
And therefore there's a crisis as a result. And so what you need to do is reform the system, use the state to regulate the distribution of profit, so that the working class has enough to buy the commodities. But as I said, or as I touched on earlier, it will actually deepen the crisis, or probably deepen the crisis of capitalism, because you've then got less surplus value available to be put towards investment and production.
And so,
and then there was Rosa Luxemburg's version, which also touched on, which was that there's too much surplus value produced to consume effectively, because you end up having so many commodities. You end up with a saturation of commodities domestically, which then have to be exported to realise that surplus value. But what's really going on is a saturation of capital domestically, relative to the size of the working population. So there's not enough workers or labour time to exploit domestically. So that then compels the capitalists to export their investment overseas. Effectively and essentially what they're doing is expanding the amount of labour and labour time that they are exploiting.
By exporting it.
Yeah, so if you export capital, you're expanding your capital as well.
And we're not just talking about outsourcing labor. We're talking about commodities being brought into new markets.
Yes, producing elsewhere. So producing in another country.
Oh, you are talking about producing elsewhere. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so most capitalist corporations, whether they're transnational or multinational, they'll have operations either transnational or in multiple nations, but they'll be registered to one particular country. So if it's a US corporation that's a multinational, it will have productive operations producing commodities in a host of countries overseas, but they will pay their taxes in the US, because that's where they're registered, if they pay any taxes, of course.
If they pay any.
So coming back to underconsumption, that's another point. So it's not only are the working class not being paid enough wages, but there's not enough taxes being paid by the corporations, and that's a form of underconsumption. But of course, the corporations will lobby very hard for a reduction in corporation tax, and of course they more or less control the government, because they have a falling rate of profit. And so to try and offset, one of the ways it's another counter tendency, one of the ways they'll try and offset a falling rate of profit is to decrease the amount of tax they pay.
So outsourcing, decreasing the amount of taxes being paid, automation. We talked about state-enforced monopolies. You used pharmaceutical companies as an example of that. And these are all examples of what's, like, I think it's called re-rationalization, right? And mergers is also another aspect of this. So when you have companies do these big mergers, So if you have 5 companies that are dominating an industry, and then one of these crises hits, 1 or 2 might fold and actually have to go bankrupt unless they merge. And if they are able to merge in a way that makes them outcompete everyone else, then a couple of those other ones are probably going to have to fold. And a good example of that's obviously like Kmart or Shopko in the United States. Target stayed afloat, but Kmart and Shopko have been almost completely eradicated, as well as like Sears, and they've all been replaced by Walmart. So you still have Target. Target's got its own kind of vibe. It's been able to maintain itself apart as a department store, but all these other ones have basically folded. And obviously now Amazon's coming, and so in a lot of ways, Walmart is suffering as a result of that. Amazon will be able to, in the long term, probably replace Walmart, though it is also plausible that Amazon could swoop up Walmart, or that you could have some Google Walmart merger versus Amazon. These kinds of things can happen. But when you have a giant recession occurring and a profitability crisis that's only been getting worse with time, right? The profitability crisis has only been getting worse, you say, since the inception of capitalism. And you show graphs in some of your works. It's just the rate of profit has been going down, 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 down. And sure, we have these new spheres of industry that pop up. There's all these kinds of innovation and re-rationalization, state enforced monopolies, automation, merging, outsourcing, etc. that occur. Obviously, part of that's also like finding ways to make one worker do the work of 5 or 10 or 100 other workers, right? When you do a merger, you no longer need as many people doing, like, you had one person who was working like at a desk and they weren't that busy. Now you've done a merger. Now that person's a little busier and a few other people have been laid off, right? These things are all occurring all the time in capitalism. There's always these crises going on. But what makes a recession is when a lot of these crises all come to fruition at the same time. And then you're saying 2019 was the beginning of a great recession. And so the approach to how the pandemic was dealt with was very convenient for capital at the time, because it resulted in a lot of these industries re-rationalizing in a way where, on the one hand, if they needed to go bankrupt, they took this as their opportunity to go bankrupt because they already weren't profitable and there was already a crisis coming in. So here's a great opportunity to fold. There's also an opportunity to merge, but more importantly, there was an opportunity for a lot of these places to close down their brick and mortar, to get people working from home. Now those people are paying for the Wi-Fi themselves, right? So you don't have to pay for the expensive internet prices or costs. You don't have to pay for rents on office buildings. That, in a sense, that shit's been outsourced. And so here you have people who are supposed to be working like a regular career in one of these kind of more established fields suddenly existing a little bit more like gig economy people, like Uber drivers. Only that's basically what working from home is. And so, and this is not to say, oh, COVID was capitalists sitting around a table like plotting, like, hey, let's do this. No, but the point is like it can be trumped up as the crisis because it's like a great opportunity for all of these other contradictions that are occurring to work themselves out in a way that they wouldn't have been able to if there wasn't some kind of a scapegoat, some kind of a bigger thing to point to. Oh, we're really doing it for this reason. Oh yeah, well, you were going to have to do it eventually anyway because you weren't very profitable, right? So, and then obviously like war gets involved as well. And so we have all these supply side crises, and gas prices are going through the roof, and we've been as a nation, at least in America, developing a rhetoric of war now for at least 5 years, one where it's like, people talk about civil war, but people also, especially on the side of Democrats, constantly talking about Russia in like this, like they're the evil one, kind of ever since, Russiagate, it's been a thing. So we have like all of these things coming to this head now. And so that's just me now. I just ran through how I understand how re-rationalization and various counter tendencies are getting involved with the current recession that we're in the midst of. And so this is me beginning to think about these bigger world historic events through the framework that you've developed, that you are popularizing, that I think is incredibly valuable. I'm just curious, like, am I doing a good job? Is this on? Am I tracking? Is there anything you'd like to add to that or correct?
Yeah, that's a very good job. Like you say, there was a crisis brewing before COVID and the lockdowns, and we know this. There's two things we can point to very clearly. Growth was pretty much at zero, GDP growth, and there was an inverted, what do they call it? On the I can't remember what it's called now, but on the short, there was an inversion of what usually happens between the short-term bonds and the long-term bonds, where there was an inversion of the interest rates, which ones were more valuable to investors. Usually it would be the long-term bonds, but at that point it was the short-term bond, and this usually happens because confidence has fallen, and so they start withdrawing investment, and that this is usually an indicator that a recession is coming.
Oh.
The interesting thing with the lockdowns is they managed such a sharp devaluation by cutting back production so sharply that they were able to avoid a technical recession, which is 6 months or 2 quarters back to back. So you had a very, very steep 2-month recession, but like enough of a bounce back to avoid 6 consecutive months of recession. Of course, since then we've had like 1 month of contraction, 1 month of growth, or variations of that, and it's only now that it looks like we're actually going to get a technical recession. The US experienced what was described as a unexpectedly severe contraction in the first quarter of 2022.
Unexpected what?
Unexpectedly severe. They weren't expecting one at all. But of course, anyone who knows what's going on, including a lot of financial experts and right-wing libertarians on this level, anyone knows, or most people who have some sort of understanding of economics will know that when the interest rate goes up, you're likely to trigger a recession. So because the price of borrowing gets more expensive, it gets more expensive to pay back your debt. So people start spending less and borrowing less and lending less, and that. So that always appears to be the immediate cause of a crisis. And this time they've been able to say, oh, it was COVID. But we had the inversion on the interest rates, and we had that was in 2018 actually, and then we also had a month of a very slight contraction in Germany and Britain in around the same time, and we were already in recessions in some Latin American countries and some African countries, I think. So it was obvious that something was brewing, and what the lockdowns enabled was a very sharp fall in production, therefore a very wide an unusually wide, outside of wartime, destruction of capital in a very quick period, a big devaluation, but because it was kept to 2 months, it avoided a depression It got the stock market going again quite quickly after
because it was what? Because it was kept to what?
Because the recession was kept to 2 months.
Okay.
They managed to they staved off a technical 6-month recession, and so that prevented like an obscene amount of panic on the markets that would have brought about what we would have to call a Great Depression. I mean, it feels like a depression to me, but they're not calling it a depression in the way that they were calling 1930 a depression at the moment.
Yeah.
But now we've got this inflation because there's so much. The production can't keep up with the amount of surplus capital that they're trying to reconvert into productive capital, and so supply isn't meeting demand because you've also got pent-up demand from during lockdown where people weren't spending and lending. So that's where the inflation comes from. Obviously, supply chains were destroyed in the lockdown as well because lots of suppliers went bust, and it takes time for them to be absorbed by other companies or to start again. So that's where the inflation comes from, and then we're at 0% interest rates. And another thing I've been pointing out that doesn't get pointed out a lot is that it usually takes an average 6% cut in interest rates, or at least in America since 1958, it's taken an average 6% cut to end a recession. Because obviously, if you and that's achieved by central bank debt purchasing. So the central bank purchases the debt that everyone else can't afford. That lowers the interest rate that's set by the central bank, which is like a baseline rate that applies to the whole economy. It's like the rate of that they're aiming for. It sets a target rate, but it also reflects the accumulation of capital, because interest is a form of profit, and so the lower the interest rate is, the lower the profit rate is in general terms. So, as I say, the bigger or the more that capital accumulates, the lower the rate of profit. That's a general one goes up and one goes down sort of thing. That's the dialectical relationship between them.
Okay.
So, but at the same time, it's also a way for them to cheapen the cost of borrowing, and therefore keep the cash flow circulating between companies and banks who are lending and that sort of thing to incentivize banks to lend. But once you get to 0%, you're running out of territory before you start going into negative rates. And the bank, as I said, the banks don't want negative rates because they make a lot of their profits from interest on the money that they're loaning out. So that's a big problem for them. And but once you start raising interest rates, what you're doing is you're buying less debt out of the economy. So that means that those companies are going to have to find another way of getting rid of that debt. And it also means that it's becoming more expensive to pay back debt in general. So that's all going to produce a situation where investors are less confident of getting back what they lent or what they invested. And that all leads up to a recession and a contraction in production. But ordinarily, that if we're not entering a final breakdown, and I'm not saying for sure that we are, but ordinarily that breakdown in production will then help the next stage to arise, because when you get that crisis, you get an overproduction of commodities because everyone's spending less. Those commodities get devalued, and therefore because you get panic selling, right? People cut prices, so the commodities become cheaper. That enables companies to buy means of production cheaper, to innovate cheaper than they would have been able to before. They can merge cheaper because they can buy up devalued capital from a company that's gone bust, and that gets the whole process going again on a higher level. So the breakdown is inevitable and necessary. But what we might see now is, with interest rates going up, that's going to trigger a recession. And so at what point do they say this recession is getting too bad for too many people? We're going to have to start printing money again, buying up debt again, pushing down interest rates again, just to stop the recession from, getting really, really bad. But that will surely mean a baseline interest rate that goes into negative territory of who knows what, 3 or 4% maybe.
Right, and right now it's unlivable right now. Like, people can't start families right now, right? Like people can't. There's nowhere to live right now. The no bedroom, just studio apartment my partner is renting costs double what a 2-bedroom house was to rent for me 10 years ago. Now, that was in a different area, so it might be off by like $100 or something like that. But yeah, she doesn't even have a bedroom. It's just a studio. Like, the living room space is the bedroom space, right? And it's right there with the kitchen. It's all right there in one space. And that's over $900 a month. And I had a 2-bedroom house that I was renting with 2 other people that were coworkers. We had this house for it was like $450 a month, but with utilities and everything like that, it came out to like something like $600 a month. It was like amazing, compared to what we have now. And it's like, but there was a time when, you could have had a house. You could have had a house, not just renting one. So even like me, this golden age that I'm looking back at was laughable by the standards of, our parents' generation, where it's like it was not like a stretch of the imagination that they would be able to be like, hey, I've fallen in love. I want to just settle down and have a house. I want to have a family. We want to have a kid. That was not like implausible. Right now, it's pretty implausible. Like the current situation we're in, we're looking at other countries to live in where housing is significantly cheaper, because we want to have a life, like there's surviving and then there's thriving, and we'd be happy to be somewhere in the middle between those things. But right now it is just surviving. It really is like grueling, And speaking of automation, I'm about to start a job at Amazon, and I'll basically be a robot overseer. Right, my whole job will be matching colors, because stuff comes into the warehouse, I sort it into robots, and robots take it away and then take it to other people, and then those people will get it onto the trucks. And so, but that warehouse is like, I actually did a live stream where I called it Behind Enemy Lines, and I went through the warehouse because I had a hard hat and vest, and I had done. Did you ever see this?
No, not yet. I'll
okay.
check it out.
I'll share it in the comments later. But this is a video where I had actually I worked there for one day as a contract laborer, just doing fire watch. My job was to walk around and make sure there were no fire hazards. And at the end of the day, they were like, okay, well, we got the sprinkler system installed, so we don't need you anymore. And I was like, cool. And then I just went right back into the warehouse while I still had my garb. And I just started a live stream, and I walked through the whole place and showed everybody. But it's like 80 to 90% of that space, it's bigger than like 6 Walmarts put together. And 80 to 90% of that space is automated. Right? Oh
Yeah.
my god, I'm getting spammed here. Gotta put hide user for this channel. There we go. And yeah, so that's obviously going to replace most distribution warehouse kinds of workers in the foreseeable future, right? Like I've done a lot of live streams with Michael Downs from the Dangerous Maybe blog. He's the local Lacanian, Zizekian warehouse worker who can explain these concepts better than anybody, and that his kind of warehouse job is, we'll see how much longer it's able to last, but Amazon's making it pretty inefficient to be a small warehouse, right? Because the people who rely on these small warehouses pretty soon could just switch to Amazon, right? And Amazon's expanding already. It has this giant warehouse that was just built, and now they're building another one. So they're quickly eating up the area. That's distribution, obviously. And when it comes to production, there's a question of like how much of it can be automated in a lot of ways. And I think Peter Fraze makes this argument in his Four Futures. If capitalists can just exploit underpaid, overworked labor instead of automating, a lot of times they will, right? And so that's where the outsourcing happens. And so that's why a lot of production, I think, that doesn't get automated hasn't been automated, and it's because it gets outsourced a lot of the time. But
yeah, but eventually it will have to be automated.
It's not possible to push it that much further, you're saying. So once this profit rate reaches zero or near zero, it's impossible.
Well, yeah, eventually at some point it will become impossible for capitalism to go on, because capital will be in too few hands, and therefore it won't be able to pay enough people enough of a wage for the system. So it'll be socially unsustainable, but also economically unsustainable. Won't be enough. The value of constant capital will probably crash towards zero. There won't be any profitable opportunities left. But what you were saying there about, I was going to say there about they don't always automate because they can outsource. Later on, though, they're going to have to automate that outsourcing, because at some point, because the demands of accumulation keep rising and keep getting harder to valorize, they have to find a new way of producing more value. And you can do that per worker. You can pay them less, but you can also automate. And this is where competition comes in and becomes really important. You do need, and sometimes it's a corporation that comes out of the blue that you hadn't heard of before, and actually replaces the ones that existed before. Because when you're a smaller company, your rate of you probably have a bigger pool of labor that you're exploiting relative to the amount of capital you have, and so it's easier to accumulate. And while that's going on, it's easier to experiment and innovate. You have more flexibility, and one of those companies might come up with an innovation that can be generalized very quickly, especially the technology we have now, and they end up overtaking the companies that were established as the biggest ones. Obviously, that's looking less likely with the stranglehold the likes of Google, Apple, and Amazon have. But they will all need to outcompete each other at some point, or they will need to merge. So there's just got to be an absolute limit to that. If one wants to outcompete the other, they're going to do that by cutting prices. And to do that, they will either have to slash wages, or they will have to automate to raise the productivity of labour. But even that will cause a devaluation of labour power, the price of labour, and therefore workers will see their wage fall because of that. So whatever happens, like, it's not a static system. It can't get to a point and go, right, this level of accumulation is good, we're not greedy anymore, or they're not going to be able to do that. It's a system that needs to keep expanding, needs to keep expanding production, needs to keep innovating, needs to keep defeating competition, needs to keep pushing the value of labour power towards zero effectively. And so in this age of automation, which I would call it a second industrial revolution rather than a fourth, which is what most people refer to it. Because for me, the third one was supposedly, what gets called the third one was the digital revolution, but that is part of the automation revolution in Marx's view. I know he obviously didn't talk about digital per se, but he talks about the mode of production between man and technology as representing an industrial revolution. So the mode between man and technology has shifted from mechanization, where we are we're almost controlled by our inputs are demanded by the machinery, whereas automation, we're moving towards a system where we're just overseeing production and doing maintenance work. We're not doing the role that we used to play with mechanized machinery, which of course replaced or began to replace manual labor. That was the first industrial revolution. So now we're undergoing is a second industrial revolution. And Marx also says that expansion tends to happen increasingly so on the basis of the latest technology. Because people always say to me, "Oh well, they can postpone the decline in the rate of profit by just expanding on the existing technology," and that's true. But because of the need to raise the amount of value being produced, and because of competition, more and more of expansion will happen on the latest technology, and the latest technology is automation and computing power. And now we're even seeing things like 3D printing, which is that's a form of automation, and like the microbialization of food production is coming back in a big way. There's something called precision fermentation, which is using microbes to produce food very quickly in a way that wasn't possible in the past, where we just had slow fermentation. And that is said to be an increasing threat to conventional intensive farming, because it's going to undercut their prices.
Oh,
yeah,
that's cool.
And it's expected to happen in the next decade, where prices will fall so low from that like there's a organization called Rethink X. They do some good videos on YouTube. They're not Marxist, but they can see where this is going. They can see that the prices of production are falling to zero effectively. And they say that as soon as a company like Nestle starts buying its milk from a company that produces through precision fermentation, that will collapse a lot of the conventional farming industry, because of course the conventional farming industry is very dependent on selling milk to companies like Nestle.
So yeah, I'll check out Rethink X, and then you also mentioned that other one, How to Live at the what
How to enjoy the end of the world.
how to enjoy the end of the world. So these are a couple of homework assignments from you. And I'll share people my behind the enemy lines video. And I think we're probably getting up to the point where we ought to close this out pretty soon. But I want to. There's two. Well, I feel like I know a lot of people who they don't really read Critique of Political Economy, if at all. At least in terms of books or whatever. And it's like they're too busy, right? And there's a lot of videos online about, or maybe podcast stuff that they maybe have heard, that kind of drives this. I would say it's basically the libertarian point about how this is, the inflation, a big thing that causes the inflation, not just the printing of money, that's part of it, but also just literally centralized banks and fiat currency. The issue is that we're not on the, a real standard of value anymore. And so that's one thing that I was hoping you could at least give them a response to. And then the other one is kind of in that vein, and it's the Great Reset, right? And, insofar, the funny thing is I know a lot of liberals who just kind of scoff at the term itself because they don't realize that it's actually the title of a book proposed by, an actual leader at the World Economic Forum. Like, it's not a joke. Like, he's actually proposing it. It's a real idea. And the whole, like, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy is like this, the kind of the thing that people, it's like the motto of it. And if anybody's not watched the Davos 2020 video, where they're talking about they're talking about the ecological crisis, and they're talking about how we need to do something about it, and they actually talk in anti-capitalist terms for a little bit. They sound anti-capitalist, and so to me, the Great Reset is like this new thing where we have world elite, billionaire class, or at least people who work for them, people who are sounding anti-capitalist, but obviously they're not. So how does this stuff factor in for you to this? Because is this a response to the fact that the way things currently are is unsustainable and they want to get out ahead of it, or is it something else? Like, how does this work for you?
Yeah. Okay. So firstly, on the money printing and the centralization of banking and the gold standard, the gold standards became a fetter on production, on the expansion of production. And this is what they won't accept. They won't accept that capitalism needs to expand to keep going. They think you can have a static form of capitalism. And that's where the conservatism comes in socially as well, because they want things to stay the same, whereas obviously technical innovation that's not all, obviously that's a generalization, that's not always the case. You get a lot of libertarians that are socially progressive in some ways, at least.
Sure.
And but of course technical innovation is also evolution. Technological evolution is ongoing, whether we're in a capitalist system or not. In a capitalist system, it cheapens production, enables us to produce more commodities more quickly, and it brings down prices. Money is also a commodity. So the gold standard, gold was the money commodity. Production increases, the price of gold production is cheapened, but because you can only produce so much gold relative to the rest of the economy, gold becomes a hindrance on the amount of money you can produce, and therefore the amount of money you can put towards investment. So money printing is really just a manifestation of, the increasing money production is really, money printing is a manifestation of a devaluation that already happened because we're producing more. And the other side of that is the fact that fiat currency, the other thing with fiat currency is it's more efficient to use in terms of speeding up the circulation of capital, because obviously when you get
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt.
do it again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I didn't catch what it said.
It goes. It was like, but it was doing that because I was suggesting. I said let's, for the closeout here for these last couple of questions, let's go without camera because it's slowing down the transmission. You were cutting in and out a little bit, and I was saying if we turn off our cameras, we'll probably come through clearly. So, that's all.
Okay.
Also, it just because it was lagging for a little bit there, I actually already had on OBS, instead of your face, I was actually showing your book. So it's already.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's perfect for you because this book is coming out on Friday, everybody. So, eyes on screen, The End of Capitalism: The Thought of Heinrich Grossman by Ted Reese. It's coming out through Zero Books. I'm very excited to get my own copy of this, and so I hope you will purchase this as well.
Yeah, so just quickly, the money printing, that's a manifestation of a devaluation that already happened because we're producing more. Fiat currency is also, so fiat currency comes about because of that, because gold becomes a fetter on the amount of money you can invest via printing, and also fiat money is more efficient, and going on from that, digital money is more efficient. So that, they're talking about central bank digital currencies. There's two things with that. It will help to lower the interest rate because you can't withdraw digital money physically. It has to be in the system, turned into a stock or a bond or a digital asset. And yeah, it's more, so they're always, the more developed capitalism gets, the more capital is accumulating, the more the circulation of capital obviously has to speed up, and therefore the whole system has to be made more efficient. And it's almost, it almost, one thing flows from the other. The Great Reset, right. Again, it's just an intent of the it's just an intensification of what was going on before. So what essentially what they're doing is they're innovating. Technological, as I say, technological evolution is going to happen in any system anyway. They're doing it though to produce more value, because the value that exists, it gets devalued. So you therefore then have to produce more value to offset that. Because when you get a devaluation, there's less value. Everyone has a smaller share than they had before. So they're trying to offset that. And yeah, like you say, the Great Reset is actually the name of a book by Klaus Schwab, who is actually a liberal Democrat. I mean, a very authoritarian one. That's what liberal Democrats are like. And yeah. So for them, a Great Reset is just a fruition of a technological leap, but it's just the latest evolution. And with technological evolution, we're sort of entering this sort of exponential period, because you're always doubling the speed of technical evolution from a previously doubled base sort of thing. So computing power tends to double every 18 months or something like that, doesn't it?
It has
and generally, generally the output under capitalism has been the doubling of output every 20 years. So yeah, with the Great Reset, it's just it's their interpretation of the automation revolution, which they call the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But it is, as I say, it's inevitable in the sense that they need to keep evolving to developing and innovating to offset the devaluation in capital that's brought about by the previous expansion. That is the contradiction. So I don't actually know in what ways they were sounding anti-capitalist, but there are an awful lot of sort of pre-socialist trends emerging, such as the deindustrialization of the workforce, where most of the workforce globally isn't working in manufacturing anymore. It's more in services, almost everywhere now.
Right.
There's other ones, like if you just look at the scientific worldview, it's pretty much dialectical materialism now, because the innovations in technology have enabled new discoveries in science. And if you read about the latest discoveries in science, it's much more systematic and holistic, and even quite dialectical. They're talking about interactions and unity of opposites and this sort of thing. And it's just a manifestation of our technical capacity rising exponentially.
Well,
even libertarians will tell you that history tends towards devaluation, and they'll tell you that that means that things get cheaper the more abundantly we produce them. There's got to be something in the back of their minds that we can switch on that points out, well, hang on, doesn't that mean there's a limit to that? There's got to be a point where you're producing so much that you're virtually at zero.
You would think so. But I mean, I think my experience with libertarians is that they're a lot more invested in investing and in having amicable relationships with wealthy people, and not hurting their feelings, and just to keeping a short-term practical mindset when it comes to money, and not getting too far ahead when it comes to thinking about other people or how other people might be impacted by these things, right? So
yeah, it's difficult to get through, but people adapt to survive, and in the short term, that for a lot of people that means doing that sort of thing. But as things get worse, there's got to be at least a section that can be gotten through to. I don't know, but I just don't. I tend not to write off. I try to narrow the sort of part of the population that you have to write off as much as possible. Obviously, there's obvious limits.
Well, and that's a really, really big thing about what's made me, I guess, hesitant about most of the current modes that activism is in today. It's because it does write off huge swaths of the population. So for instance, libertarians, they're just greedy, they're just fedora wearing keyboard warriors who want to lower the age of consent. Like, that is the leftist meme, I guess, stereotype of libertarians. I don't think that's true at all. I know libertarians who I do respect, and who I don't blame them at all for not taking these kinds of things seriously. And back when ContraPoints was cool, there was a time when it was in the Why I Left Academia video essay from ContraPoints. Was one of the things that Natalie had said was that there's no real dialogue or debate or genuine engagement with ideas in the university today, and then said, I hope to see real dialogue and debate, preferably between socialists and libertarians. There's a lot more hope for that conversation than any of these other conversations we're seeing. And then that never happened. That never really came from that channel. There was a time when that seemed to matter, and then it stopped mattering so much, and now it's just pretty much preaching to the choir, it seems like. And so and I think that's a general thing. I've actually had experiences with other people who are content creators where I'll talk to them about, like, I'd like to do something that takes Mises seriously and really thinks it through. And I think that especially like MMT people, they assume a left liberal progressive audience, and they don't seem interested at all in trying to communicate with people who see problems with primarily with like how MMT approaches create more inflation. Instead of like treating those concerns seriously, they're just kind of disregarded. And it's like, I think that they should be taken seriously. I think that these are not baseless concerns. And even if there's charlatans who are in influencer positions sometimes, that doesn't mean that the audiences are. The workers who are tuning in aren't charlatans. They've got legitimate reasons for tuning in beyond reasons we might write these people off. And so, that gets to a larger thing about how, if there is to be a worker state, instead of a capitalist state, it cannot just represent, radical liberal left progressive values and take and write everyone else off. And in fact, when we act like people who have an opinion that differs from us don't deserve to have a job, obviously that's going to be scary to people who see a worker state in the future, because they're like, well, what? So, you're going to own the means of production and you're going to control the entire economy. And if I say the wrong thing, then you can disappear me, or you can get me out of a job, or you can take away my house. I'll take, cataclysmic capitalism or feudalism over that. And I think that's a legitimate concern. I think it should be taken seriously, and we ought to develop ourselves in a mode that's a little bit more, that leaves more room for differences, say on like I'm basically saying that the cultural left and right, almost, when it comes to things like guns and abortion and some of these classic things that people get fixated on, those are going to be represented in any transitional society. And so we can't just act like, insofar as you care about one of those things, you're, and you differ from the
Yeah, I mean, I actually see the socialist state withering away a lot more quickly now than it would have 100 years ago, because of the technological revolutions we're seeing now. And that's something the socialist state, I think, is going to have to really bear in mind, because, and the other thing is, like, the internet is not really, you can't control what people say on the internet. It's not practical. So you're going to have, like, I think the technological developments we're seeing actually makes democracy more viable and more necessary than it has done in the past, because everyone now has this expectation of being able to say what they want. They can publish what you want to say. You couldn't do that in the past, and obviously a lot of it gets lost in the masses of data and the masses of commentary that are produced, and the companies that own the social media manage to skew it somewhat in their own favour, and in the favour of their economic interests and political interests.
Right.
But it's very difficult to, like, because what happens when that happens is another company will pop up and say, well, we're going to do it more, we're going to be more democratic, and there'll be a migration over to that company, who will therefore get more advertising.
Right.
And so capitalism does have this progressive, there is one side to it that's progressive. It's kind of progressive in a reactionary way, because it's progressing towards socialism. It's right. It's providing all the building blocks, whether because of it or despite it. But the more technology evolves and the cheaper production becomes, the more you get to a point where everyone will be able to produce for themselves. Because if in the future we all own super powerful 3D printers and can grow our own food super quick, and all the rest of it, then you don't need to buy from anyone else. And at some point, you after that transitionary period, you won't need to buy from the state either. You'll just be able to produce for yourself, or in small communities, or however you want to think about it. So yeah, I don't.
Well, this is why I'm most concerned. No, go.
All right, yeah. So yeah, obviously you won't be able to do exactly what you want. You will still be held accountable to other members of the public, like you would expect to be in any culture or past mode of production. But
right,
this is the thing, like freedom of expression, the rising technical capacity of people in the future, and we can't say exactly where that's going because we don't know exactly what innovations are going to emerge, and it is a bit scary to think about some of the innovations that people are talking about these days. But you have to manage that situation because a new generation, I mean, things like social conservatism and liberalism and that, it's all quite relative really, because what really happens is a new generation inherits a new level of technological capacity, and they take to it more willingly, I suppose, to older generations, perhaps because older generations are psychologically used to how they've done things during their life, and they find it harder to adapt, whereas a new generation doesn't need to adapt, it just is born into it. And so that kind of is I think that's kind of like the underlying thing with like the culture wars that we don't really talk about. And of course humans will continue to evolve to their environment, and our environment is changing technologically, so that's something we haven't really thought about, and I don't think we should go into, but
right,
it's that sort of thing, but it has to be managed democratically, because otherwise it's just a free-for-all. But again, the state will wither away, and how a sense of democracy is maintained after that, I'm not exactly sure. But it's a lot of it's going to be finding out and working it out as we go.
Wow, Ted, thank you so much for coming on and for explaining this stuff to me like I'm a stupid plebe. I really appreciate it, because you actually are. I mean, I have been struggling with your book and with Heinrich Grossman and just trying to wrap my head around being able to articulate any of this stuff, and I feel like in this conversation you really helped me bring it all together in a lot of ways. And so
You're welcome.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. We can always carry on these discussions, and anyone who has any questions that I can try and explain more clearly or thoroughly, I'm always happy to.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to get out to anybody as far as like information about your book launch, or anything else that you're doing, or any social media or anything like that you want to share?
Not at the moment. The book's out Friday. You can order it now. I haven't finished arranging the launch. It will be during June. But other than that, not for now.
Hey, fair enough. And Ben, who I live with, who's comes from that libertarian background, he says, FYI, plebe, some of us aren't feeling the greatest in the house. Okay, so I'm gonna not go in there because I don't want to get sick. And then in parentheses he said, and libertarians generally don't see falling prices as a problem, but don't think they'll reach zero.
Okay.
So one of the things that I'd like to do someday, after having really gotten my bearings in economics and the different schools of economics and all of this stuff. Let's come back to this conversation, and I want to talk about Mises and Marx and the falling rate of profit between these traditions, and maybe we'll bring Ben in on that conversation. That'd be great. That'd be fun.
That would be cool. I would like to start debating people with different viewpoints. And just as a very short answer to that, you do need socialism to complete that process of bringing prices down to zero. And of course, this inflation, I think we'll get hyperinflation because, you know, it's becoming so unprofitable to invest in private production. That's why you get the hyperinflation. So we go backwards in that sense, and that will force people to re-examine everything and start thinking about building socialism, which will then complete that process of bringing prices down to zero.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining.
You too. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care.